Okay, here we are. It's 5:31. We can start the recording if there is one. Okay. I'll call to order the October 22nd meeting of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. Can I get a roll call?
Sure can. And again, as a admin note here, I have muted everybody except for myself, so you are going to need to unmute yourselves. Director Engfer.
Present.
Director Leopold. Director McPherson.
Here.
Director Cassidy. Director Franklin.
Here.
Director Pollock.
I saw
Director
him.
Pollock. Yeah, I saw him earlier.
Here.
Gotcha.
I'm here.
Director Dills.
Here.
I believe I saw him earlier as well. Director Ferrister, if you are trying to speak, we cannot hear you.
Here.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Director Henry. Director Stiles. Director Stiles with us. Okay, and Director Perry.
Here.
All right, now for alternates, Director Baskin. Director Brown. Director Koopman. Director Hayes. Director Lind. Director Moran.
Present.
All right, and I have you down as taking the spot of Director Henry this evening.
Correct.
Okay, and Director Eckwall. Now let me just make sure real quick that we don't have anybody calling in. Don't believe we do. All right, we have nobody calling in. One moment. All right, we have 8 directors present.
Okay,
Nick,
that's
I think
good.
Director Stiles just joined, so you might
Ruth
want to.
just joined.
Okay, we have 9 directors present.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any additions or deletions to the regular agenda?
There's none from staff.
Okay, any oral communications on matters not on the agenda? That would be someone from the public. Talk about something not on the agenda. Okay, hearing none. Can I get an approval of the minutes of the September 24th meeting?
I move approval of the minutes of the September 24th meeting. This is Jack Dillis.
Can I get a second?
And
I'll
I-
second.
Dale Pollock, second. Jack Dillis, moved. Have a roll call vote, please, Nick.
All righty, one moment. All righty, Director Engfer.
Aye.
Director McPherson. Director McPherson, you might need to unmute yourself, sir. All right. I'm going to mark him as absent for this vote. Director Franklin.
yes,
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Ferris.
Aye.
Director Stiles. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold that. Director Moran.
Aye.
Director Stiles.
aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Eight ayes and 3 absent.
Did you get McPherson? Okay.
No, did not.
Yep. What was your
He says aye.
aye? Okay.
Okay, 2.2 is the board meeting schedule for November and December. Everyone receive that? Pierrette, you want to?
It's, as you know, we did online doodle to or email to request the best availability, and the two dates that had the most people available were November 16th for the November meeting, that is Monday, and then December 9th, what is Wednesday for December meeting. So we need the board to approve those two dates.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So move. McPherson?
McPherson move, I second, please.
Ruth, I second.
Ruth Stiles seconds. Have a roll call vote, Nick.
Yes, you can. Who was the maker of that motion? I have Styles as second. Sorry.
McPherson was the maker and Stiles was the second.
Perfect. All right, one moment. Okay, and again, this is for to approve the December or the November and December meeting schedules as emailed out earlier.
Correct.
Director Engfer,
Aye.
Director McPherson,
Aye.
Director Franklin,
Aye.
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Aye.
Director Ferris,
Aye.
Director Moran,
Aye.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye. Okay.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, excellent. Now, consent agenda is next. We're hoping to get through this meeting to the meat of it quickly, so I'm hoping we can just have a motion for the consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, who was that second? That was Dale.
That was Dale.
Okay, so Stiles and Dale. Okay, can I have roll call, please?
Sure can. I think we're getting pretty good at this. Director Engfer,
Aye.
Director Lee, or Director McPherson,
Aye.
Aye.
Director Pollock,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Yes.
Director Ferris,
Aye.
Director Moran,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Yes.
Director Perry.
Yes. Okay, excellent. Well done. Okay, that takes us down to the general informational session. I'm going to hand over facilitation at this point to Dave Sepos. Dave?
Yes, good evening, everybody. As was indicated, we have an awful lot to go over tonight. So I'm going to dive us right in. First, we'll start with any general updates on the GSP roadmap. So Georgina, I don't know if you or John are going to cover that. If there's anything you want to do on that, go ahead.
Yeah, that's going to be me. Are you able to bring that up, please, Nick, while I start talking? So
Yep, one moment.
we're going to look ahead to November and December. In November, we're going to look at Section 2. You will have given us comments on Section 2. Hopefully, you've had time to look at that. I think that the deadline for providing your comments is coming up in early November. Nick, what is the date on that?
It's November 9th.
November 9th. Okay, so not too far. And so we will be discussing it at the next meeting, those big comments that come out of that we need to discuss. We're going to revisit all the statements of significant unreasonable, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about undue financial burden, I think. And so in light of what we're going to hear today, because we have that term in a lot of the other statements, so we're going to revisit that. There's no time this month to do that. Then we're going to have a policy discussion on projects and management actions, And then any carryover, which I really hope there isn't, we will add on to November. November's already looking pretty full there. And then in December, we're hoping to have a workshop with you all that Dave and I will put together to come together to talk about, now you've got a lot of information about the basin, where do you think the problem statement is? What are we trying to solve here? Because when we get to the projects and management actions, we need to have some kind of something to aim for, and that would be, we would get that from a problem statement and just a general understanding of where the issues are. Hopefully we all have consensus on that and we can move forward next year with that. So it'll be a nice way to end the year with this more informal workshop, and get ready for next year. And that's all I have on the roadmap. That's what's coming up.
Okay, thank you very much, Georgina. Any questions from anybody to Georgina? All right, hearing none and seeing none. I'm going to direct our attention now to section 4.1.2 and the letters A through E. We have a lot to go through tonight. So I'm going to dive right in, but I just need everybody to be aware we'll find an appropriate time for ideally a very quick break, but we've got more than likely over 2 hours of material that and discussion to be built into this this one agenda item alone. The first two agenda items, I'm going to do some very quick framing and then get us going, and I'll hand it over to Sierra first. These very first two items are coming from discussion that's taken place at the working group as an outcome of y'all's meetings, these meetings, wherein we've recognized that by necessity, because there is so much to do and there are limited times to do it, almost all of the meetings in the last 5 or so months have focused on these very necessary technical conversations, technical presentations, and the sort of call and response dialogue about the technical issues. And in the process of doing that, one of the things that's gotten a little bit lost is just some of your dialogue as a board between yourselves and each other with regards to certain philosophies that you're looking to make sure are being upheld in your decision making, and things that have come up along the way, such as the two topics tonight, one being the roles of private well owners, the impact and relationship and or lack thereof of the de minimis definition in SGMA, and then also this ongoing conversation about undue financial burden. So with that, I'm going to do a couple quick last framing things and then hand it over to Sarah. Regarding this first item, obviously there have been comments that have been made in the last several meetings regarding by Eden and Angela and others about the impacts to private pumpers, the concerns the private pumpers have had or our representatives have had when they see certain language and things, and those are very relevant and important. So we felt it was a need time to come back to this topic, remind everybody about the role of de minimis, remind everybody what it does and doesn't do, remind everybody about how SGMA plays out in terms of who complies and not, and just make sure that we're having that conversation. So in addition to the memo that was sent out, we are looking to have you all have an actual conversation about this after Sierra's done with her part. And then we're going to do the same thing with the undue topic. We're really going to look to get a little more, hopefully, of a quote-unquote decision, although not really a formal action. My facilitation role in these first two items is going to be a bit more like I did some years back, a bit more directive facilitation rather than the latter portions of today, which will be more sort of back to the call and response type facilitation I've been doing. So I just frame that up. As always, just for members of the public and board members, when we do open up the floor for commentary, I'm going to always go to the board first and the board members present. Then I can go to the alternates such as is needed, and then I will open the floor for the public. So I would like everybody to please honor that sequence so that the board gets an opportunity to talk and it's memorialized as such. So with that, Sarah, I'm going to hand it to you.
All right, thank you. You set such a good framework up there that I'm not going to have to do my whole preamble that I had.
Sorry.
That's okay. I hope everybody got a chance to read the memo that was in the board packet. The presentation is really just kind of a repeat of the information there. There's nothing new in the presentation. It's just to help us work through it and make sure that everybody kind of took the time to think about everything that we put on in that document. And as Dave said, we haven't had this conversation as a group in probably since the development of the guiding principles. I think that's the last time I remember us really having conversations about what de minimis means both under Sigma and to this agency. And as we're about to see the results of some of the modeling come through, or we're really going to start having a better, although not fully comprehensive, but a better understanding of the impacts to and benefits from the basin of de minimis pumping, as well as the potential impacts to de minimis users from other pumpers. We thought it was a good idea to have this conversation just to make sure that we're all starting on kind of a level playing field of understanding before we start talking about any policy implications from whatever the outcomes of our research are. So to some of you, I think this might even be a little bit new because some of the board members have come on in the time since we last had these conversations. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you today, and just please don't be shy. It's important to us to really get a good sense of everybody's perspectives, where everyone's coming from, what everyone's understandings are. And if you're confused, please bring it up so that we can make sure that we're clarifying and everybody really is on the same page. And there we go. So what is de minimis? This is really the key part to understanding what we're talking about for this presentation. So the definition under Sigma of what de minimis means is a well that pumps 2 acre-feet per year or less for domestic use. So all of that's important. 2 acre-feet is a pretty substantial amount of water. Most households, we estimate, in the basin are using less than half an acre-foot. So we've broadly accepted in this basin that a well that's serving 1 to 4 connections for household use is likely to be de minimis. If somebody's got a small ag operation that's under 2 acre-feet, that wouldn't fall under the category of de minimis, for example, if it was a commercial operation. But domestic household use, we're expecting that any household is using nowhere near that much water. So a private well owner is likely to be a de minimis user. One of the things Sigma does for de minimis users is it exempts them from metering and reporting their water use to the agency. So that, I know that's been a big concern for, it's one of the things that we hear time and again from the community on private wells, that they want, that's not something that they want to do, and that's not something that we are even able to do under Sigma. So there will be no requesting everybody put a meter on their well, no requesting monthly meter readings or anything like that. Sigma does not exempt de minimis pumpers from addressing any impacts that they're having on the basin, and that includes cumulative impact. So maybe one individual pumper isn't creating an issue, but if there are areas, neighborhoods where there's a high concentration of pumpers, then maybe cumulatively there would be an impact there, and Sigma does not exempt de minimis pumpers from addressing that. This agency has put a lot of thought, especially in the first year of development of this agency, into how the agency feels about de minimis pumpers and where they fit into this. And that's represented not just in these 2 guiding principles, but also the fact that we do have 2 private well owner representatives on the board. So I do want to remind you of these guiding principles. I think they're important, and they are something that everybody agreed to early on. And it's important that as decisions are made that we keep coming back to this, because these represent who the agency is, who we want to be. So guiding principle number 4 states that groundwater users that extract 2 acre-feet are considered de minimis. This classification limits statutory financial measurements and responsibilities of these extractors, and is the means through which some Sigma-related burdens are minimized. And for example, that would be metering and reporting. The agency is committed to this definition and will explore opportunities to minimize Sigma-related impacts to all groundwater extractors. So that was one thing that we thought was important to remind you. And guiding principle number 12, actions to achieve sustainable outcomes, report outcomes to the state and maintain the daily activities of the agency will require consistent funding. Financial contributions to support this work will be proportionally distributed. So this is where the wording that's important, proportionally distributed amongst the membership and many beneficial users based on the impacts and the benefits to groundwater and surface water resources. And then because we didn't know what that looked like at the time, and I would say that we still don't necessarily at this time, specific proportional contributions will be determined in the future. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the use of fees or the possible use of fees that the agency has. There are no restrictions on the ability of the GSA to charge de minimis extractors fees after the adoption of the GSP. So some of you might remember there was some funny wording about being private wells being regulated under SGMA, and the fees could only be applied to regulated well owners. That was for the development of the plan, for paying for the development of the plan. For the development after the plan and the implementation of that plan, there are no restrictions in the language. Of course, again, back to our guiding principles and also to the law, any fees have to be defensible in that they are scientifically established. We can't make it up. It has to be based on our understanding of impacts and benefits, based on our monitoring and our modeling, and they have to be proportional. Again, back to our guiding principles. These fees would have to be subject to, well, either Prop 218 or 26. There's ongoing cases being decided in court that are changing the understanding of what those requirements would be. But one thing to understand about Prop 218 is that it does not allow for subsidizing benefits, which would mean certain users, if they're receiving benefits, they can't be, the costs of those benefits can't be subsidized by other users. And now is where I really want to start the thought exercise that is kind of the point of this presentation today. I want to start thinking, or having you think about, what we could learn from the model and what that would mean for how we want to address private well owners moving forward. And again, we have lots of time. We have not just until the GSP is due, but these things can always be readdressed at the updates every 5 years. So let's consider some of these possible scenarios. One would be that the results are inconclusive, and that's not unlikely necessarily, about the impacts of de minimis pumping. We could also have the results show that some certain areas, some concentrations of pumpers in a certain area are having a substantial impact on, say, stream flow. The results could show that without projects and management actions, some concentrations of private well owners could see their wells going dry under a climate change scenario. We could have results showing that de minimis pumping is not having an impact, or is having a very, very small impact to any of these sustainability management criteria. Or we could see, and these are just some ideas, there could be others out there, the modeling could show that right now, private well owners are having a very minimal impact, but that impact would be increasing over time based on the climate change scenarios that we're running with. So I want to bring up these considerations before we start the conversation. Like I said, you'll have the opportunity to revisit these issues again on both fees or restrictions of pumping, which I really haven't talked about because I don't think that's something that would be on the table, but it's for right now, but it's something to consider that is within the power of the agency. We can readdress this during the 5-year update when we will have more data, and we'll have more monitoring data, and we'll be able to recalibrate the model with that. The staff has talked about this, and it's our opinion that it would be probably premature to commit to limiting any agency abilities, either now or in the future, to impose regulations. That doesn't mean that we're saying that you should make decisions right now. We're saying that it would probably not be a good idea to say the agency will never restrict pumping on any of the users, statements like that. And as things evolve, future conditions may necessitate a different approach. So we could come up with an approach now. We could say in the 5-year update, this still makes sense. We like what we're doing, but then maybe in 10 years, we see the situation is changing and it's something that we want to revisit. So that concludes the presentation. Dave, I'll hand it over to you now to do some of the facilitation.
Yeah, thank you. So again, we wanted to kind of reframe this, all the reasons that Sierra just said. I know that we have Angela with us as one of the two private pumper directors, so I don't want to put you on the spot, Angela, but at the same time, I certainly want to make sure that you have an opportunity to weigh in to see if there's anything that you've seen here that you disagree with or is of a concern to you. So we want to open the floor, and again, what we're trying to do is make sure that as we're moving ahead, that we've got some shared meaning about what the benefits and, frankly, lack thereof are to the de minimis designation and what its meaning and implications are. So we're gonna use the common model of people getting into the queue. So with that, I'm gonna open up the floor. Anybody wish to weigh in at this time? Is the again, one of the things we're looking for is does the language and the information presented to you, this idea that we're recommending that you not dispense with decision making too early, and not cut off all your options. So let's go to Doug, and then we'll go to Chris. So Doug, go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. I have a couple of questions just to help me make sure I understand kind of the problem space here. Some of the materials we've looked at, we're talking about some of the beneficial effects of, septic outputs to groundwater levels. But it's my assumption that there's not a one-to-one correlation between septic systems and private wells. That is, there are private pumpers are on septic, but there may be septic users who are not on private wells. For example, maybe up on Jameson, where I think there's a water system, but I think people are on septic. But I just wanted to confirm that understanding.
That's right. Actually, most of the San Lorenzo Valley is not on sewer. They're almost entirely on septic, other than a few little areas. So that's correct. And I should say that the model is taking into account septic system return flow as part of the equation.
Right, but it's not necessarily that it directly correlates to private pumping extraction.
No.
No. The other question I have is a little more theoretical. Building off of your statement, Sierra, that our working hypothesis is that the typical private domestic user is using way less than 2 acre-feet, which number one is a relief given the amount of water that is. But number two, it kind of opens the door maybe for there to be in my mind at least, a tiered level of definitions here where we could have, the de jure de minimis user at 2 acre-feet, but for the sake of our operations or our policies, would it be possible for us to define some other lower level of usage? You'd posited 1/2 acre-foot. That if folks are able to either self-report or self-assess that they're using that, or assert that they're using that, or otherwise document it, that we might be able to differentiate between users at different levels under the de minimis threshold? Do we have the freedom to do that?
That's an interesting question. I think my first thought is that it would be honestly, it would have to be mostly speculative based on, we can look at aerial imagery. We have done some exercises elsewhere in the county where we've looked at aerial imagery to try to identify areas that were more likely to be using larger amounts of water, even if it maybe is under 2 acre-feet, because they've got, like, say, a small area in ag production or something. But it would be hard because we can't meter, it would be hard because we can't meter to be able to verify any of that. So it would really be down to some level of self-reporting, and I don't know that the benefits we would receive from that would offset the the administrative effort that would go into trying to tailor that.
Okay.
Chris, or Doug, this is Dave. Using some experience from other locations, you could do that. You would obviously have to not be essentially defying the definition of de minimis, but you could work within the definition of de minimis, but then it gets to what the points that Sierra just made.
Thanks, that's helpful context.
Okay, but you know, again, one of the things that I think Sarah said is that while the de minimis definition is the 2 acre-foot per year, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but the agency still has a responsibility to also be looking at cumulative effects. Meaning you could have multiple, I mean, there are, you know, Kern, for instance, has got an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 or so units that are de minimis well owners. Multiply 8 to 10,000, you know, de minimis users across a groundwater basin, and that could still be a pretty significant cumulative impact. And so the basin still has to account for that as best it can. Is that correct, Sierra?
That is my understanding and how I've been approaching this based on my reading of SGMA. And I think that is particularly likely to be the case where there's concentrations of pumping near surface waters. If the pumping's happening in shallow aquifers, that's something that we've talked about being a potential issue, not because there's one person pumping, you know, probably significantly less than half an acre foot, but because there are a large number of people pumping a little amount of water each.
Right. Okay, let's go to Chris, and then Angela, Ruth, and then John. So Chris Perry, go ahead.
Yes, I am going to speak. I'm going to use a voice, and I'm going to speak for Nick Vrolik, and I'm going to say I know what Nick would say, and I know what I would say to him in response after hearing all this, is that this is all just theoretical, as I understand it.
Right.
It would take some very conclusive model or stream flow or some data before this agency, I'm going to wager, this agency would consider any of the things we've spoken about. I think it's great to get this on the table, but I don't think we should sidetrack ourselves and try to make a decision now about it, since it relies on future information. Right? This is just what's possible. This isn't what we're going to do. But I think it's a great idea to just be clear that all of these things are possible under SGMA. But as speaking for one board member, it's not my intention to you know, be in hot pursuit of this. This data would have to make itself clear. Most of the things we've been focusing on with projects and mitigation have to do with the municipal pumpers. You know, there's no secret meetings about, you know, going after those individual well owners, because there's arguments to be made on the amount of recharge that's going on you know, on large acreage, etc. I mean, I think we all know the you know, some of the points that can be brought up, and I would imagine any conclusion would be well vetted and would have to be pretty conclusive that there was a situation where a project or something needed to be focused on individual well owners, de minimis users.
Chris, I promise you, I've been hearing Nick's voice in my head the whole time I was writing the memo and the presentation. But yes, I think that your point is well taken, that this really is theoretical at the point. We just want to make sure that everybody's got a base understanding of possible. It's not anything that anyone needs to move forward with now.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Angela and then Ruth.
Yeah, I think basically Chris kind of took the words out of my mouth, because I'm, you know, I am actually a private well owner myself, as you guys know, but I'm also like, you know, Nick is my little, I don't know if you want to call him an angel or a devil, but he's sitting on my shoulder talking into my ear. But yeah, I mean, I just really feel like, you know, kind of reiterating what Chris said is, you know, and a lot of people who are not private well owners, I don't think understand this, but, you know, we not only pay our own fees to maintain, you know, the you know, the maintenance, the electricity, the monitoring, the testing, like all of that we pay for ourselves. And pretty much every private well owner that I know is so environmentally conscious about what they put on their property in terms of, weed detainment. Like everybody that I know, we are so conscious about the amount of water we use, about the chemicals, if any, that we even use on our properties. I mean, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, ripped out all of my grass, put in a percolation pond. 0 water leaves my property. It literally goes right back into the ground. And I even have, the tanks that come off my roof. And I pretty much know, I would say at least 80% of private well owners all do that type of stuff. And that's not something that somebody gets, their water from the city of Scotts Valley or the city of San Lorenzo do. They all have big lawns and do 20 loads of laundry a day and do all this stuff, and then let Scotts Valley Water District take up, the burden. And so the fact that, people would even contemplate charging us fees, to me, is just ridiculous. And I know when we have our private well owner meeting, I can guarantee you most of those private well owners are going to say the same thing. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you,
All right,
Angela.
Let's go to Ruth and then John, and then we'll see if there's any of the board members that wish to. Actually, we'll go to Ruth, then look to John, a staff member, and then if there's any other board members, otherwise we'll go to some comments from the public. So Ruth, go ahead.
Well, first off, Angela, would like to say, look around Scotts Valley, and you'll see that a lot of those lawns have been disappearing, and the people that have the lawns still, they're getting pretty brown. And a lot of the development is happening in areas where they're getting recycled water, or they're just getting these little tiny postage stamp gardens that are using very small amounts of water. But the main point I wanted to make was about the septic tanks and the impact on the nitrates in the river. I just got my property tax bill, and there's a couple of charges for septic tank maintenance. And I'm wondering if those agencies, or whatever they are, can charge for the nitrate remediation process.
Well, conveniently, John is the next person who's queued up to speak, so I think I'm going to just let him answer that question.
Sure. I'm the guy that puts those charges on your property tax, so I can speak to that. I'm also a private well owner, although I'm not in this basin. The septic tank charges have been on the books since 1989. As you know, they're relatively nominal, and they just pay for some mostly administrative and management services that the county performs to promote better septic system management. We are exploring the potential to maybe increase those fees, but that would be subject to either Prop 218 or Prop 26. So we have to be careful how we do that and be sure that they're justified. That's something to consider. Right now, really, the burden is on the individual property owner. If they are contributing nitrate because they're in a very sandy soil, they have the burden of, when they replace their system, of installing enhanced treatment. So it's not all the septic systems that are contributing the nitrate, but it is the ones in the sandy soil. So we would have to decide whether that gets spread across the board, or maybe it's the water agencies that benefit from less nitrate that should help pay for that. I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities to look at that. I did want to just comment on the issue of how much de minimis users use. We're not assuming that they use 2 acre feet or that they use a half an acre foot. When we do our modeling and do our water budgets, we really are trying to pin it down to what the average use is for de minimis users. And that's based on metering data from some of our small water systems that are very similar geographically to the individual well users, and also just some meter data that we do have on individual water users. So we do try to make our best estimate of that. And then, of course, we're also estimating what the return flow is from the septic systems, which is going to be variable. So it's an average. In Mid-County, we did do some sort of sensitivity analysis where we sort of adjusted those factors just to see how, if we changed our assumptions, what would the results be? And they didn't really turn out to be all that different. So we'll do this a similar thing here in Santa Margarita also to try to get a better, as we assess what the impacts of private well owners might be.
All right, thank you, John. I'm going to jump down to Doug Engfer as a board member, and then seeing no others, I will then jump back to a couple of our members of the public and alternates who would like to get in the queue. So Doug, go ahead.
I think, Dave, if I may interrupt, Doug, excuse me. I think in this particular case, isn't Jeff a board member, Jeff Koopman, because we have a missing, Eden's not here.
Okay, all right, well, that's fine. Then let me go to Jeff in deference to him. Jeff, we'll go to you first, and then we'll go to Doug in the queue, and then we'll double back around any members of the public. So Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't request to talk, but
oh, you were just indicating you were here. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, but I will go ahead and speak at this moment. I'm up on Mudstone myself, so we're not in the area where there's sand and we're dumping nitrates into the aquifer. We're actually in an area where it takes a long time for the septic fluid to diffuse into the aquifer, and it has a long opportunity to decompose, so the nitrates disappear. So our whole area here is on Mudstone.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, Doug, go ahead. Doug, you still with us?
Yeah, thanks. And Jeff's comment kind of points to, yeah, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Jeff's comment points to one observation I'd make is that we're going to have a little bit of a challenge here differentiating between individual impacts and cumulative impacts. It feels to me like the water budget work that we're going to be looking at tonight at least talks about some of those cumulative impacts, and there may even be some opportunities with the sub areas for us to be able to look at some more location-based impacts, I guess, as you pointed out, Sierra, as regards maybe clusters of wells or concentrations of wells, something like that. I appreciated Ruth's observation about the nitrates, and will reiterate for the record that one of your beneficial users of interconnected surface water, that would be the city of Santa Cruz, spends probably tens of millions of dollars a year on remediating those nitrates at our water treatment plant. And we're looking at spending a significant amount of money to further mitigate water quality issues in the river. And I don't think we can separate benefits from impacts for anyone in the basin, right? There should not be any free riding. I don't think anywhere in the policies that we put together. And I would also just observe that the average water consumption levels, both in San Lorenzo Valley and in Scotts Valley, are really quite low per household. So I think we should probably refrain from making generalized statements about water use based on the water system one's connected to.
Okay, I'm going to jump in then, and Dave must be.
No, I'm sorry. I was muted. My apologies. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much, Doug. So we're going to go to Rosemary as staff for the city, Santa Cruz, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for the public and start with Frank. So Rosemary, go ahead, please.
No, Doug made my point. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any other board members wish to get into the queue at this time? All right. Seeing none and hearing none, we are now going to then open up the floor for public comment. We have one member of the public that is in the queue. Nick, do you wish to do your sort of standard statement about soliciting other public comments from folks on the phone? Go ahead, please.
Yep, I absolutely can. I don't know if we actually have anybody calling in. I saw a few pop up, but I'm not seeing anybody in the queue. However, let's just do our due diligence there. If you are a member of the public calling in via telephone, I'm pretty sure you're unmuted. If you have anything to say at this time, again, members of the public on telephone only.
Okay, and so we will start, however, even if somebody does wish to get into the queue, with Frank Sheep, who is a private well owner. So Frank, if you can go ahead, please.
Hey there. Thanks for letting me speak. What's a telephone? Sorry, it's sort of a Zoom humor comment. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Thanks for the work you guys are doing. I've been on a couple meetings in the past, one special and one standard meeting. So I must say I'm still coming up to speed on the technical terms. I would say just general observations is most well owners on private septic systems, it is for the most part a closed system that has a high percentage of recharge. Estimating nitrates back into the ground based on soil conditions, I mean, that's probably more science than I'm capable of doing. I will say when I first moved in, I reached out to some folks at the water treatment plant in Scotts Valley, because that's my postal area. I'm outside of the city limits, and said, gee, what stuff should I not pour down the toilet and the sink to preserve the quality of the aquifer? And this is a long time ago. And I got, no information back. So as a member of the public who, maybe throws out too much junk mail, it would be great to have general public education around sort of Angela's comments on how to be a good citizen relative to preserving water quality in the aquifer. I have noted that there were a number of wells that were taken offline in Scotts Valley Water District due to, I guess, either gas station, contamination or percolate dry cleaners. So it would be pretty hard for probably a private well owner to contaminate the aquifer, but nonetheless, all of us that are trying to be good citizens, it would be great if information was made more readily available, and that could be done through a number of different means. And I won't go into those. The other thing is that, if you read sort of the water contaminant level at the San Lorenzo River exit into the ocean, sort of, residual from bad septic systems or leaky septic systems, I would argue that the county does little to enforce, at least that I can see, quality of septic systems up in that whole basin or that whole drainage of San Lorenzo. I'm open to be proven wrong. Having had a septic system here for a bunch of years and having had redo a leach field and sort of learn about that, we were on our own. We had no permits required that we were certainly aware of. And again, we believe we're doing a good job, but we're sort of on the higher end of the spectrum in terms of perhaps education and income, so we can afford to do the research. If I was somebody in the mountains and had very little money and not a lot of knowledge or whatever, and I had a leaky septic system, I'd have no idea, nor would I be inclined to do any research. So certainly that is a source of contamination both to the river drainage and then the aquifer as well from a nitrate perspective. And then just in general, Angela's comments, again, were spot on. I really do appreciate it. She seems well informed. Would like to circle back with her in private or via email if I could, to learn a little bit more of what she's up to. So those are really my comments. I hit on a whole bunch of points, but again, thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. And I will say that you've probably got the best captive audience you could potentially want for some of the things you said, because on this call, you've got the general manager of Scotts Valley Water District who may want to double back around you for your past experience with them. You've also got the water director and other key water resource staff for the county. And you've got Angela. So I know that note taking is taking place about your comments, and I'm hoping that folks will be able to double back around to Frank. For the purposes of expediency, I'm going to look for us to proceed then, because as I said, we have an awful lot to do. So just to close this out, obviously we didn't want anything, nor did we intend for anything conclusive to come from tonight. We did want to revisit the topic as teeing it up for future times and to be reminding folks, because it is going to be coming up. So with that, I'm going to do one last check-in. Is there any board members that wish to weigh in any further on this topic? Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next topic. Okay, hearing none and seeing none, we're going to transition on to item B, which is the undue financial burden definition. I'm going to hand over to Terry in just a minute, but she and I have been working together, and I'm going to do a little bit of upfront framing here and then hand it over. We are going to be trying to look for some resolution tonight on what undue can mean, but I'm also going to say that also what actually may be really important is what should or shouldn't even be included in significance and unreasonableness statements. We've had a lot of meetings lately where this topic has come up. It's occupied airtime, this particular topic in the discussions. As we proceed, as you've heard many times, we're going to have to continue to get more efficient and more focused. There's just a lot to do. So I'm going to hand it over to Terry in a second here, but just to frame things up a little bit. One thing that was already said tonight is that, you know, we're going to be doubling back around in probably December in this workshop of a revisiting of a lot of the things you all have been working on over the last many months. And that's going to be a key kind of conclusion to some of this discussion we're about to go into, that you're going to revisit even one more time the significance and unreasonableness of statements. It's important to know, and I may be remiss, or maybe others are remiss for having not weighed in on this earlier in your prior discussions over the last couple of months, but it's important to really know the following. Financial and economic impacts are very important in SGMA, and they are addressed in SGMA, okay? And financial and economic impact analysis has a home in various places within SGMA, both statutorily and in the regulations. Also, and we're going to come back around to this a bit in this discussion, also, you've addressed it yourself in your own guiding principles. However, the significant and unreasonableness statements is not really intended to be a home for financial and economic impact statements. Doesn't mean you can't, and obviously you have been. But significance and unreasonableness is a problem statement that was always really intended in SGMA to be focused on the physical conditions associated with groundwater. That's a key distinction. It's a problem statement about the impacts for any of the sustainability indicators that you need to address. So with that, I'm going to hand this now to Terry to talk further through the memo that got sent out. And we really do want to open the floor and try to facilitate through some conclusion tonight, not a formal decision, but some conclusion that can set the stage, hopefully, to maybe expedite some of these discussions and at least set the stage to double back around to some things and determine and finalize what you want to include and what you don't want to include in your final significance and unreasonableness statements. So with that, Terry, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening, everybody. Focusing on significant and unreasonable first, I want to remind everybody that the California Constitution says that all of our water has to be put to beneficial use to the fullest extent of which it's capable, and any waste or unreasonable use or unreasonable method of use of water must be prevented. So our California Constitution is already talking about an unreasonable use. And if you look at the history of Supreme Court cases in California, they're battling over what is unreasonable use, what has to be stopped, what is the time when this is not allowed to take place anymore. So SGMA says that we are supposed to come up with significant and unreasonable statements and on the 6 sustainability indicators. And we have been working really hard on that, and we revisit them and we talk about them. But sadly, SGMA doesn't define the meaning of significant and unreasonable. And so this board gets to go through the definition process. One of the words that have shown up again and again is undue financial burden. That's been repeated again and again, a lot of discussion about it. And I'll give you one example. For the draft language right now, chronic lowering of groundwater levels, it says significant and unreasonable chronic lowering of groundwater levels occurs if lowered levels materially impair groundwater supply or cause undue financial burden for a significant number of the basin's beneficial users or uses. So what is undue financial burden? So one definition is unwarranted, inappropriate use. It's excessive, it's disproportionate. It rises to a level that's more than necessary, acceptable, or reasonable. And we use undue financial burden I'm wondering if we should get rid of the word financial. If it's an undue burden, if it's inappropriate, those are the concepts that should be considered. Later tonight, Chelsea is going to be discussing significant and unreasonable depletions of interconnected surface water. So we're going to have the opportunity to review how undue financial burden fits in that definition again. But then there's another concept of financial burden that Dave just mentioned. And that applies to like our project and management actions and financial concerns. First of all, our guiding principles say that we have to effectively manage our resources and with fiscal responsibility, meaning we just can't go crazy with spending money. And also, SGMA requires that there always be conducted a cost-benefit analysis with every project and management action. So that's baked in to the law. Finally, SGMA also requires best management practices that have to be technologically and economically effective, practicable, and based on available science. So again, there's a concept of financial prudency built in. And I'm going to conclude and pass it back to Dave with the notion that these statements of significant and unreasonable conditions will be revised as we get more information from the science that's coming in, and we have the opportunity to revisit them way up until the time we publish our plan. So Dave, take it away.
Oh, I'm going to open up the floor. And again, what we're trying to do here tonight is see if we can get again, not a formal decision because we don't have it agendized that way, but to see if we can be moving collectively towards a sense of whether, as we, for instance, move into Chelsea's presentation a little bit and recognizing, like we've said a couple times here, that we're going to be revisiting significant and reasonableness statements in the next couple months. Perhaps, we want to see whether you all want to continue pursuing introducing language about undue financial burden, or based upon the things that are in the memo, based on what we've talked about tonight, whether perhaps you might be leaning towards a higher comfort level of stepping away from introducing that language and recognizing that there is existing regulatory mandate and framing that you've done that already bookends that in, and perhaps therefore doesn't necessitate this. I'm not looking to advocate. If it sounds like I am, I'm not, but we are trying to be conscious of the time that gets spent on this and whether you're really achieving what you want in this regard. So I'm going to open the floor as we always do. So we would like to really start hearing from you all and see how folks feel. Again, floor is open, and let's see, board members, what you may have to say. So we wish to get into the queue. I'm not seeing anybody, so again, we're trying to get a conversation going here where we can either affirm that this is going to continue to be a critically important thing, or okay, well, here we go, Jack. So go ahead, please, Jack.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, as somebody that's been consistently wanting language like this in there, recognizing we need to be able to explain what it is. For me, it's mostly just a reminder, if you will, a guide to say, the cost is important because it's probably going to be quite a bit. And I just like us keeping our focus, one of the foci on this. I don't know that I need to have it in there from my perspective, but somewhere I just want that to be clear. I'm hearing that there are lots of requirements that we be prudent, that we do cost effectiveness studies, those kind of things. I like all that, but other than being in the requirements, where would we say all that? Where would we say it that we could still send that message that as we go through this process, we take that seriously? That is important. Would that be in our guiding principles?
And I believe it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it actually, that's I was going to read to. So that it actually is in your guiding principles. So your guiding principle 13 says the agency recognizes its duty to taxpayers and future generations to ensure that our critically important water and financial resources are managed effectively to achieve and maintain sustainable groundwater conditions and fiscal responsibility. So you already have inserted in, above and beyond the regulatory mandates, a commitment, a principal commitment to ensure that you're looking out for that. Now, that guiding principle statement could be changed or enhanced or strengthened if you felt it needed to be. So that, but there is absolutely a sentiment that's already expressed there.
Okay. Well, as one voice then, guiding principles, that's the foundation of what we're doing. So I don't personally feel like this has to be in there at this point, even though I was pushing for that earlier. It's enough for me that our guiding principles be strong about that concept.
Okay, thank you very much, Jack. Chris, go ahead, please.
And that's what I was gonna bring up, the thing about the guiding principles. And I think it's been a good discussion, but I don't think it's that helpful to put, you know, a legal definition to it at this point. I think everyone understands what it means. I like the idea of not necessarily focusing on burden, undue burden, in the larger sense of the word. Of course, in embracing financial as a burden, but I think that has some that resonates with me. Just bigger picture.
So Chris, I want to make sure I'm understanding. In doing so, you're saying that in addition to what Jack just said, the idea that there are both these mandates on the regulatory side and the expression of commitment, which obviously you were a part of because you were part of the team that actually built the guiding principles, that
Right.
frame coming sort of from both sides, you feel does an effective job, at least now, to represent that there is a financial prudency or financial oversight responsibility that this board has and intends to maintain. Am I getting that right?
Yes, exactly. And as long as we don't bury the guiding principles and a future board forgets they exist, then I think they'll always be there to guide us. Oddly
Well,
enough.
and you know, this is something that we talked about at length when they were being built, and that's why I refer to them as we hold these truths to be self-evident. I've been with programs that have been for many, many years, and literally people pull them out and go, hey, wait a minute, this is what our principles say we're to do. Let's go to Doug and then to Jeff.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to point back to the guiding principles and terminology that we've used elsewhere, and just state for the record that as I've been interpreting undue burden, I've been thinking about that in the context of proportionality and you know, sort of reading it as trying to avoid disproportionate burden on any given group. And I noted with satisfaction that is one of the words that's in the definition for undue. So I could live without the language as long as we maintain the principle of proportionality of sharing impacts and responsibilities.
Which also is addressed in one of your other guiding principles. You know, it's
Exactly.
more of a financial factor in that regard, but you made it again in those principles. There's a statement of you know, shared albeit proportional responsibility. So that your founding fathers and mothers of your guiding principles were clairvoyant in that regard. Let's go to Jeff and then see if there's any further comments. Jeff Kubin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd have to assume that the plan that we're submitting to the state is a legal document, and when we're making statements in that legal document, it really doesn't matter what our guiding principles are. You know, we're not submitting our guiding principles to the state. We're submitting this legal document to the state. So I have to imagine that with the wording that we put in there is critical to how it's interpreted and in the long term. So I think that if we're, you know, wanting to put certain nuances in how we're going to go forward, I think we need to put them in, those nuances in the wording that we submit to the state.
I mean, Jeff, this is Dave, and I will say that you know, in the context of what might be defined as, I'm making finger quotes, legal document, I don't think the GSPs are really defined as such. They do not undergo CEQA or NEPA certification. They are approved or not, or denied on principally technical merits and upon any particular GSA or GSAs, plural, having met all the requirements in the regulations about what must be included in the GSPs. But beyond that, they're not really defined as legal documents other than acting as the plan that guides the activities of a particular local agency. And again, as we've said a lot of times, the local agencies have really significant latitude and authorities to implement SGMA in a variety of different ways. There are baseline responsibilities that they must do. Obviously, they must maintain sustainability and they must not go below minimum thresholds and all those kinds of things we've talked about. But they're not legally binding documents. And like I say, they don't undergo any other type of an environmental compliance bar that you might find. So your term legal document is, I'm going to respectfully say, is not necessarily exactly applicable to the GSP for this basin or any other basin. And in fact, that is, again, in the local context, why local agencies and SGMA granted the local agencies the pretty broad authorities to assume whatever philosophies they wanted at a particular local level as to how to manage groundwater, with some lines in the sand of bare minimums that they must maintain. So I know it's a little bit squishy, but it would not be defined as a legal document per se.
Okay. But we are legally required to submit a document, or else we will get, controlled by the state. So there is some legal requirement to submit this document. And I do not think that when we submit this document that they're going to go back and look into our guiding principles and reassess the wording that we put in our submission based on other documents such as our guiding principles, which are not probably going to be something that they're going to look at.
No, but neither are they going to look at a lot of things. They will look, for instance, at the statute, the regulatory requirement that Terry spoke of, for instance, which is that the PMAs will have to undergo, and your GSP will have to show that you actually did a defensible cost-benefit analyses. So that's the kind of things that they will look to, because that's the mandate. You're right, they won't really care about whether there's guiding principles or not. They will care about whether the other regulatory requirements that are stated have been met, which is things such as a BC analysis. Let's go to Dale and then Georgina. Dale, go ahead.
Well, I kind of liked what Jeff was talking about, and I understand that it potentially may not need to be in this statement of significant and unreasonable, but I like that it points back to the guiding principles, which clearly state what our feelings are, what our intentions and hopes are. But I kind of like it being in here to point us back to that as something that will go into the GSP and be submitted. If we take it out, I'm just unsure of how we then define significant and unreasonable.
Okay. Let's go to Georgina. Staff.
Okay, so I think that putting the guiding principles in the GSP is probably a good idea. And we could put that in section 1 when we talk about the GSA. I think that's a good appendix to that. And I don't think we had it in before, but that's something that we can add in. But I'm not going to have an opinion on whether you keep it in or not, because it's your statement. But I just wanted to put that out there that I do think it should be in the GSP.
Jeff, going back to you then, would you support, as Georgina just said, would you support having the guiding principles included, or were you saying that even if they were, it wouldn't really be enough to address the financial burden question?
I'm okay with putting the guiding principles in the document. I do think that when we make that statement, though, that we should, clarify that statement with the nuances that we're thinking about. And I think the wording in there is good. That's currently in there.
That's currently in the guiding principles, you mean?
Yeah. No, okay. Well, the wording that's also in these statements, that we're being careful to put these statements together in ways that we're thinking how they should be played out. These statements are just broad, generalized statements, but they could end up coming back to us as something that someone sues us over because we're not adhering to the statements that we declared. And I think that we want to make sure the statements address what our intentions are.
Okay. So we have some mixed perspective here tonight on whether the, as Terry had stated, the regulatory mandate and some of the guiding principle language might suffice, and then conversely, the other comments saying that while they may suffice, it is also beneficial to continue to include undue financial burden or language, something thereof, in the significant or reasonableness statement. So we're going to have a chance to sort of visit that real time this evening, because we're going to come back to another one of the statements on interconnected surface waters. Are there any other opinions? Again, what we're trying to do is help you all triage, if you will, how to effectively include what needs to be included in sections to you all, so that you're sure that your interests and the interests of those you represent are found in these statements. So I'm going to open up the floor one last time to again, given we have a couple people, so I don't think we've resolved a change here per se, other than to indicate that some people are perhaps heartened by a revisitation of the guiding principles. Are there any other board members that wish to get into the queue on this topic? Otherwise, I will open up the floor for public comment. So any last comments from board members? All right, hearing none and seeing none. Nick, come to you just to go ahead and make your standard statement, and then we'll open the floor for public comment.
Okie doke. If you're on a telephone and you are calling into this meeting, go ahead and this is your opportunity to give a public comment should you choose. Members of the public calling in via telephone. I don't think we have any, but just to make sure.
Okay, and also obviously any members of the public that are online with us, and if you'd like to get in the queue, same thing, go into the chat mode and just write the word comment or question, and I will come to you. Hearing none and seeing none, we're gonna double back around. We're gonna go ahead and conclude this section, and we are now going to go into the next topic that we've referred to, which is the statement of significant and reasonable depletion of interconnected surface water. So I'm going to hand it over to Chelsea Neal, and we are going to go into that topic and revisit that statement one more time. So I think we'll need to do a pause here while Nick changes things out.
Good evening, everyone. So as has been stated this evening, we are just going to be looking at the statement of significant and unreasonable for the depletion of interconnected surface water. And based on feedback that we heard during the last meeting, we have revised that statement. So the new updated statement reads, significant and unreasonable depletion of interconnected surface water occurs if the agency projects or management actions or groundwater use causes undue financial burden to beneficial users of surface water or impacts the ability of GDEs or selected priority species to thrive. So just to sort of recap, we heard a number of different comments during the last meeting, some various concerns. There was, a comment about switching the order of GDEs and selected priority species, so that was clearer. There was concern about the use of the word viability. There was concern about how users downstream of the basin could be impacted, and also just that the statement was perhaps a little bit confusing and unclear. So hopefully tried to clarify some of that. The other thing that we did was we looked at the other statements of significant and reasonable and tried to make this statement more consistent in terms of the language and wording, so that when you look at all of them during the next meeting, that they really go together and are pretty consistent across the board. And then the only other thing that I wanted to point out was, I just want to talk about the term selected priority species. Early on in the process, we heard that the board wanted species to be a part of this statement. So we developed a list of what the priority species are by looking at the list of species of concern for the basin. This includes species that are threatened, endangered, or rare, and we then got input on this list from staff and from the Surface Water Technical Advisory Group. And then from this list, we then selected a shorter list of species. And this shorter list is representative of other species in the basin. So the shorter list of species, you know, if the needs of those species are being met, then the needs of all of the species on that longer list are being met. So I just wanted to clarify what we meant by the term selected priority species. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. And also just to include that the draft list of selected priority species includes steelhead, coho, lamprey, California red-legged frog, the chorus popcorn flower, the San Francisco popcorn flower, the western pond turtle, and the California giant salamander. And let's see. We also received a suggestion, a couple of edits before the meeting tonight, and I just wanted to include what those were. They included adding a comma after the word ground use, changing causes to cause, and changing impacts to impact. The minor grammatical changes, but I just wanted to bring those up because those were brought up prior to the meeting. And I think I'm interested to hear if there's any further questions or if the directors are happy with this statement. Obviously, there's things to consider in terms of the undue financial burden piece as well. And, you know, there will also be time to address that during the next meeting too, when we look at what all of those statements are together. So with that, I think we'll open it up.
All right, so a couple of questions just logistically. Nick, the version that you have up, is that a live PowerPoint or is that the PDF? So if we chose to be making some real-time adjustments, can we do that here, or can that not be done on this version that we've got pulled up?
I have a live PowerPoint, so I can make those adjustments if you would like. I can go into edit mode.
Okay. Just because you had mentioned some of the edits that have been suggested via email. I'm going to pose, before we go into the queue, I want to pose a question back to you, Chelsea, and perhaps, frankly, staff to perhaps further inform some of the discussion and comments. Given that a term like selected priority species does have implications because selected means it's been selected by some body or entity, and the question would be whom, and because the term priority species actually has meaning, and I think Rosemary had spoken to this in the last meeting, you know, priority actually has meaning at both the state and federal level of Endangered Species Acts. I'm going to throw a question out to the board members as they get into the queue, which is, could it be feasible if philosophically what you all are really looking to identify is to recognize that you want to be concerned about impacts, impact to the ability of GDEs and impact to aquatic species or aquatic species in ecosystems, could you potentially be comfortable with just changing that to impacts the ability of GDEs or aquatic species to thrive? And in doing so, there is an inherent reliance on these other regulatory and statutory layers that exist. There are Federal Endangered Species Act, there are State Endangered Species Act, there are a number of federal and state resource trustees that have responsibility to regulate and enforce on impacts. So if the words selected and or priority are hanging anybody up, perhaps you could just broaden that a bit to just the general aquatic ecosystems as a part of a problem statement. So I'll stop there for right now, and then there's another question I have. But with that, I'm going to go to Chris, and then Jeff, and then Ruth in that order. Chris, go ahead.
You know, something that just jumped out at me here for the first time, sometimes seeing it on the screen does this, is without any belittlement to undue financial burden, and with maybe pointing to priority, it seems like those two impacts should be switched. The first one should be about the selected species, and then the second one should be or create undue financial burden. Seems like the main priority in the surface water issue is about the GEDs and selected priority species. It makes it sound like we're more focused on any financial burden as opposed to the other. I know it's not the case. I know they're both equal, but it's just when I read it, that's what jumped out at me. Seeing it on a screen for some reason made it.
So the suggestion would be to just sort of flip the sequence to put perhaps more of the direct emphasis on the water, the surface water impacts and species as the first statement, and then not discount the undue burden, but make that the secondary part of the phrase.
That seems like a better, ordering of first impression is like we're most concerned about groundwater dependent ecosystems and priority species. However, we also realize it can't, we're not trying to cause undue financial burden here.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Jeff Koopman.
Could I share my screen for a moment?
Nick would have to handle that.
It doesn't sound like it right this second, Jeff. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you think?
Yeah, either go ahead and speak to it, Jeff, or we can come back, double back around to you. But I want to keep things moving here because of time. Okay. So can you just speak to it?
Sure. So I have the statement broken out where I rearranged it so that the clauses that trigger and the clauses that causes are listed as bullets, and then I made some changes to it. So I sent a copy of that to Nick, which he could present if you want on the screen. One of the things I wanted to mention is that when we say GDEs and selected priority species, to clarify the relationship between those two, it's not or, because one's a set of the other. So I thought that we should say selected GDEs as measured by selected priority species, because that's kind of what we were intending there with that statement, that we were going to, use those selected priority species to kind of track our GDE progress. The other thing was that impacts the GDEs. Well, there's no doubt that any water consumption we have whatsoever is impacting them at some microscopic level. So even if it's only a small fraction of the water that is washing over them. So I thought the word significantly should be added in the beginning of that. So that statement, I think, should read significantly impacts the ability of GDEs as measured by selected priority species to thrive. So that would be a change to that sentence, so that we would say, okay, it has to be some kind of, measurable, significant change that is, and we look at the selected priority species in order to figure out that, okay, there's some problems going on here. And then that's one part of it. And then the other part of it that I thought needed change was I keep harping on this rainfall issue. And I've gone back and found documents that show that 1977, the water levels were even lower than 2015. State of California published and reviewed that with Ricker and Sierra. So the thing is that, we are going to run into droughts, and the droughts are going to have really low water. And so guaranteeing that they're going to have as much water in 2015 is pretty much impossible. If the water's not there, it's not there. So I think that I wanted to add on a clause at the very end of this that says, but not where said impacts are from a lack of adequate annual rainfall. So basically what that does is it says, okay, we're going to do all these things, we're going to protect the species, but we can't make up for a lack of rainfall. And it even says that in the SGMA documents that we're not required to make up for dry years. That's not part of what we're required to do. And even though we have an aspirational goal of, hey, let's do better than what's required, we still can't make up for rainfall. Water flows into the Santa Margarita Aquifer, and it flows right back out again in about 2 years, 1 to 2 years. And so if there's 2 years in a row of drought, we're kind of screwed. We can't make up for that water. We don't have reservoirs all over the place ready to pour water in the creeks and fill them back up again. So we have to make sure that we don't assume, or offer that we're going to be making up for all of that water that's not there.
It is, Jeff, I'll tell you that it's an interesting dynamic that you just spoke to is getting tested under SGMA. Actually, it was getting tested even in some of the early plans that were introduced, like on, say, the Napa River, and it's going to be interesting to see how that goes under legal test ultimately, because while it's very unclear what the DWR is going to say, it's already been documented from some of the resource trustee agencies that were there to be base flow impacts due to climate impacts and or water use, that those trustee agencies at least currently are telegraphing a willingness to come into particular basins and say, you are going to have to change your water use methods to continue to allow for base flows to maintain for species of concern. So that very argument has been playing itself out and is yet unresolved on the Napa River, which, as you can imagine, given the wine industry, was a pretty big shot across their bow. And they're basically saying, if all else fails and all other conditions fail, then we're going to look to water uses as the next thing to be curtailed, because come hell or high water, no pun intended, base flows to support species will be retained. So that'll be an interesting test. Let's go to Dale and then Georgina. Dale, go ahead.
Well, it's been a lot of discussion, so I've kind of lost track of all of the input. I do like Chris's input on switching those two around, where you have the GDEs before the financial burden, undue financial burden. I still think that should be in there. And I like your input, Dave, on changing that to just the aquatic.
Okay. Did you have any opinions on some of the suggestions that Jeff had made about like the significant statement or the clarifier of the you know, as related to available water?
Well, as I understand it, as I understand it, it's, you know, we're to do no harm, and so I think that keeping that in mind, yeah, climate change is going to be something that's going to be happening out of our control, and so I think I just go back to, you know, the management actions, the things that we're implementing, as long as we're doing no harm. That's kind of the focus for me.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I, you know, just to sort of, again, to be avoiding doing real-time wordsmithing because of time, I know that Chelsea and Perrette and Nick and I are doing note-taking. So my expectation is that we're not going to try to wordsmith tonight. In fact, instead, we're going to take the feedback and then go back to the drawing board on the next iteration. Let's go to Georgina, and then we'll go to Chris and then Jeff again. Chris, go ahead. Or yeah, go ahead. Or Georgina, I'm sorry, Georgina, and then Chris. Georgina, go ahead.
Okay, I think, Dave, you're out of order, not that you're unruly, but of order of the people, because it actually is Ruth, and then it's Terry who then withdrew, and then it's Rick Rogers. So you're looking too far up the list.
Oh, my bad. I'm terribly sorry. You're right. My bad. Ruth, go ahead, please.
Okay, well, everybody has a lot of comments, but one of the things I really liked about this was it became much more readable, and I'd like to thank you for that. We can work with some of these other points, and I do support what Chris said about reversing those two. One thing about switching it to aquatic species, that has a biological meaning that would not include all the species that she was talking about. And the other thing, Chelsea, is were there species on that selected priority species list that were beyond the ones you'd mentioned?
So I listed everything that was on our selected list. I think there were 7 or 8 species. But your point is a good one, and one I wanted to interject as well is that not all of those are aquatic species. We have a couple of flowers on there. So aquatic organisms isn't going to work. We would have to find something else in place of priority species, but aquatic, that word would not cover everything on that selected list or on the list of priority species in general.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And again, my apologies for Dale, in particular to you, for putting you on the spot. Now I understand why you're like, wait, what? Why is Dave calling on me? Terry, I see you withdrawing your comments, so we're going to go down to Rick Rogers. Rick, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I got just a question on the proposed statement. Under the statement, what is the definition of thrive, and how is that going to be measured or achievable? Thrive to me could have a lot of meanings, and I'm curious to know what the definition is under the statement, and how's it going to be measured out in the out in the stream, so to speak.
I think that that's a good question in general, and one that no matter what word we choose, we're going to have to think about what that definition means. Previously, we said viability, but also, we would need to think about what that would mean as well. So perhaps,
I think what
thinking
thrive
about
means, like flourish, is that achievable even with some of these people?
Right.
But Dave,
And that was that. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Chelsea.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think, Rosemary, that might be you speaking. You were one of the people that had the comment last time that wanted something more along the lines of flourishing as compared to viability. So I might let you answer that question.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the last time that this said to threaten the viability, the work that's going on in the San Lorenzo in particular is the fishery work is really about trying to restore the steelhead and coho populations there. That's the goal of the city's habitat conservation plan. That's the goal of the recovery plan that the National Marine Fisheries Service has put together. So to me, to sort of doesn't negatively impact the viability is not a good enough word. If the word, thrive is, too vague, I think we could find a word, but it's more than just minimum. That's my point.
Go ahead.
No, Rick, I was going to come back to you and say, so what I take from what you're saying, Rick, is that you're concerned that there would be a term that is meaningful but not nebulous, something that can be measured or something to that effect. So let's rather than talk about the word, what do you want to make sure can get encapsulated in the word, Rick?
Well, there's a lot of components to I mean, I'm not a fisheries biologist by far, but the depletion of interconnected surface water is not the only impact to fisheries. There's probably nitrate, there's silt, there's all types of things that I've heard over time that are potentially impacting coho and steelhead and fisheries. And it's not just the surface water. Grant you that's a big part of it. But to me, to Rosemary's point, thrive is at the other end of her concerns. I think there needs to be somewhat of a measurable happy medium there. Not the lowest threshold, but not and thrive to me is flourish. And I'm not even sure that's achievable. I have to talk to fisheries expert, even achievable in the streams to have coho and steelhead thrive again. It would be nice, but I'm not sure if that's achievable.
So Rick, I don't disagree with the comments you're making, and I do think we could find a word that is more, sort of measurable or sort of understandable. I do totally agree with you about the fact that it's sort of in the, to quote Hillary Clinton, it takes a village. Well, it takes a whole watershed that's functioning. And we just had an event in our watershed, and along with some other watersheds here on the coast, that will undoubtedly affect the functionality of these watersheds for, years, if not decades to come. So I do think that point you're making is a good one, but I don't think we want to set the standard for this particular issue as the minimum either.
I agree. Thank you.
All right, let's go to John. Ricker?
Well, just to follow up on that, somebody before mentioned the term do no harm. And I think that's really what we're looking for here. We don't want to be reducing flows below what they would otherwise be without our extractions. When we look at say surface diversions, we have our fisheries biologists do what's called an effects analysis, where they analyze how much habitat is available under different flow scenarios. And ideally, you don't want to reduce the amount of habitat. It goes up and down depending on whether it's a dry year or a wet year or a dry season. But you compare the unimpaired habitat availability to what the effect of your project is, and you want to reduce those effects. So I think that's kind of what we're looking here. The other thing that we want to do is, or I want to respond to Jeff, the GDEs and the priority species are not necessarily reflective of the GDEs. The GDEs are a broader term. It's things like riparian vegetation or wetlands or ponds that are dependent on having the groundwater at a certain level. The target species are somewhat dependent on those habitats, but we're really looking at also preserving those habitats that are dependent on groundwater at certain levels. So I think it really is, you know, GDEs or selected priority species, as opposed to one being an indicator of the other. You really have to look at both of those. And in terms of climate change, again, it gets back to do no harm. We need to take into effect that climate change will happen, but we don't want our management activities or our pumping to make the impacts of climate change worse than they otherwise would be. And we have found in the past that when we have droughts, the stream flows are much more seriously impacted as a result of our diversions or our pumping than they would otherwise be during the drought. So that's what we're trying to prevent going forward, is looking at those impacts, and again, striving to not make things worse, to do no harm.
All right, let's sticking with the queue. We're going to go to Sierra and then Jeff. And I think Doug has rescinded his, let me scroll. Yeah, he withdrew. So we'll go to Sierra and then Jeff and then come back to Rosemary. I don't know if she had spoken exactly what you want to talk to. Sierra, go ahead.
Yeah, I can withdraw mine. Most of what I was going to say has been said by everyone else.
All right, Jeff, we'll go ahead to you, Jeff. Jeff Koopman.
You're muted.
Jeff Koopman, you unmuted. All right, I'm going to go to Rosemary and then we'll double back to Jeff. Rosemary, go ahead. Was there anything else you would want to add from what you previously said?
I like John's idea about do no harm, but I think the reference point for deciding what harm is not the current condition. It's the natural condition or the unaffected condition. So I would, and so that, I think that creates some other sets of issues, but in general, I think the concept that John is talking about is right. It's really about compared to what as a reference point.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Jeff Koopman, are you unmuted and with us?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Okay. So I think that we need to think about that. We have GDEs as or selected priority species in the wording, and I think we should just drop selected priority species out of there if we're not using them to be the measurements of, you know, the proxies for GDEs. And we should just, and besides saying GDEs, we should spell that out and actually say groundwater dependent ecosystems. So I think we should say significantly impacts the ability of groundwater dependent ecosystems to thrive. I think that simplifies it and includes the selected priority species. There's no reason to add that in redundantly as a second term in there. That's one thing I would like to say. I'd like to also say that we talked about the amount of water that we're consuming being significant relative to the what they need. The amount of water that's consumed up here and at the top end of the valley, between Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley, we consume a small portion of the water that is flowing down the stream. It's a very small portion compared to what happens in a low water flow year. I think if we did a pie chart that shows the amount of water flowing in a normal year and the amount of water flowing even in a dry year, up here at the top end of the valley, we're not drawing that much water. It's, at the very bottom, Santa Cruz is a large, municipal area, and it draws a lot of water. And so it's competing significantly with the groundwater dependent ecosystem at that level. But if you look at our total consumption up here in those few months of the late summer and stuff, it's not significant. It's not that significant.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Georgina and then to Terry Rain, and I believe that will close out the current names in the list, and then we'll open up the floor for public comments, should there not be any other board member comments, and then we'll take a short break. So Georgina, go ahead.
Okay, it sounded like Jeff was gonna say exactly what I was gonna say about dropping the species part of that sentence, because ecosystem, when I look it up online, what is it? It's a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. And so it's not just the physical environment part, it's the organisms as well, and maybe that covers it. And to spell it out would be good. And then also somewhere, I think it's in DWR's document, that's what their intention of GDEs is to cover this, but we have kind of changed it to mean the habitat and not and exclude the organisms where it should actually be together. So that's all I wanted to say on that.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Terry. Terry Rain.
Thank you. I agree with Georgina, and the SGMA defines GDEs as a plant and animal community, and it's an ecological community or species that depend on groundwater emerging from aquifers or on groundwater occurring near the ground surface. So I think we could strike the selected priority species.
All right. Let's go to Doug and then Jeff Koopman. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess just to circle back, I do like how succinct this statement is, and I hope that in the next round of editing, it doesn't reinflate with verbosity. I'd also observe that whatever water the city of Santa Cruz takes typically out of the river, it's, we do take on the order of about 40% of our water. It's well downstream of these GDEs, and we're investing huge amounts of money in order to be able to leave as much water as possible in the river, maintaining our habitat conservation plan, which, may or may not qualify as an undue burden depending upon the amount of pumping that's going on upstream. So again, I think we need to attend to the water budget data that come out later in terms of helping us understand the real quantification of the puts and calls on the water.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Jeff, and then I see Rosemary back in the queue, and I've actually got a question about another aspect of the statement. So we'll go to Jeff. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, to Doug's statement, I do acknowledge that when water is pumped out of Santa at the lower diversion, that is actually the GDEs got to enjoy the benefit of that water for the most of the period that it was in the river. So that is true. When water, for instance, if new construction happens in Scotts Valley, that water is taken out of the aquifer period and put in sewer pipes. And when water is left in the stream and goes downstream to Santa Cruz, when growth occurs in Santa Cruz instead of Scotts Valley, then the water is enjoyed by the GDE. So there's a big difference there, and Doug, you're right to point that out. But my point was just that the overall percentage drawn from the river by the upstream users here is actually fairly small. The thing that I wanted to, there's two things that I wanted to focus on, and one of them, and I might need to yield the floor here and then come back to both of them, but I'll list both of them, and I want them both addressed, is I want to put in the statement, and I want to hear some feedback on it, but not where said impacts are from a lack of adequate annual rainfall. So in other words, if there is a low rainfall year, are we all supposed to just stop pumping to make up and let the GDEs have their water? They use way more water than we use. The percentage that we use is a fraction of what the GDEs get every year, and we're supposed to stop pumping because there's no rainfall this year. There will be an impact on them because maybe the 1/6 or 1/12 of what they would use is missing because we're pumping it, but that 1/6 or 1/12 of whatever they're using is critical to us, and we need to have that water. And to make up for the fact that there's no rain that year, which happens in the history and is going to happen in the future, I think we need to address that and not put it in here that we're required to supply them all the water that they possibly can have. Sometimes there's low years and they have a bummer year. That's part of history and something that the ecosystem goes through. I've got some plots that show the distribution of low rainfall years, and although there can be 2 low rainfall years in a row, it's very unlikely for there to be 3. Actually, if you look at the data, which is kind of cool. So I think most of the groundwater dependent ecosystem will make it through those 3 years because actually they have in the past, and that's part of what nature does. So that's one of the things I wanted to put in there. The other thing I wanted to address, so that's one topic that I want to have some feedback on. And the other one is that I bulleted out in the copy that I sent to Nick that he could present up for you guys to see. I bulleted out the significant and unreasonable depletion of interconnected surface water occurs if any of projects, management actions, or basin groundwater use causes. So I bulleted out those 3 things causes either the undue financial burden or the significantly impacts the GDEs. And those are 2 other bullets. So the reason why I broke it up that way is to look at the semantics of the system, the sentence here. And the key thing is that we're adding in basin groundwater use. That is not in our requirements. Our requirements are that our projects or management actions are the things that we're responsible for. We're adding in this new requirement of groundwater use. And that's the aspirational goal that was added in during the TAG group meeting that we want to do above and beyond what's required of us. So we're saying groundwater use is one of the criteria that we're going to use to trigger, if that causes a problem. Normally, that's not a requirement of us to say that that is causing a problem, but we're going to add in that groundwater use might be causing a problem. So we need to be careful about triggering it so we can get sued right away that our current use is a problem. For instance, Scotts Valley uses a lot of water.
Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we've got a lot of the stuff to cover here, so I'm wondering whether some of your comments can be written down and then sent into the team.
It is sent in to Nick. He has a copy of it.
Okay. We have to keep moving along. We've still got 2 major sections that we've still got to go through tonight. So if you can go ahead and sum up pretty quickly, I'd appreciate it, please.
Okay, so we're adding in the groundwater use phrase, and we need to consider whether or not that we don't want that to trigger a lot of problems for us. So those are two things that I want to have addressed in this meeting tonight, I'm hoping.
Okay. Well, I mean, addressed in terms of you stated it, and then therefore it's part of the record as terms of getting it resolved tonight. That again, this is going to clearly have to go back to staff to do more work on, and it's going to have to get resolved in December at the latest. Rosemary, I know that you're in the queue. Chris, you're in the queue. I'm going to have to call an end to the queue after Chris. I'm going to look to Rosemary and Chris to be as brief as possible, please, and then we got to go to a break.
Okay. So I just want to say that I disagree with Terry and Georgina about excluding the selected priority species. And the reason I disagree is that because they are identified as, they're kind of like indicator species or sentinels in the system. And so we are monitoring them. We have performance data about how they're doing now. And if you want to be able to measure this in some kind of a way to demonstrate whether we are or are not producing these significant and unreasonable effects, I think keeping the priority species in as indicators of how we're doing on the larger ecosystem thing is a really important thing to do. And the other thing I guess I just want to say is that I believe that when droughts come, it's true that everyone has to experience the pain of that. But I'm going to share the wealth, share the pain strategy, which means that during droughts, we cut back, and yes, the fish may have to cut back too, but it's a share the pain, and it's not, we're priority over them. So that's all.
All right, thank you. We're going to Chris, then we're going to open up public comment, and then we're going to go to a very, very short break. Chris, go ahead, please.
Okay, 2 real quick. We want to be careful not to worry about too many details in the proposed statement. We do have our measurable segment of this, and it does take into account that 1 year of low rainfall. It's not just doesn't kick in because there's one bad year or 2 bad years even. It's over time what the direction is. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that, I mean, I don't know. It just seems like this is a groundwater agency. We can't take the groundwater out of groundwater use out of the responsibility of a groundwater agency. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to public comment. As Nick has said, if you're a member of the public, we'd ask you to go ahead, and you're on by phone, we ask you to go ahead, excuse me, and unmute yourself. And if you're a member of the public wishing to comment online, we ask that you use the chat mode as others have done. Any members of the public wish to get into the queue at this time? All right, hearing none and seeing none. What we are going to do now is go to a 5-minute break. I'm going to point out that we have 2 very large sections still to do this evening. I would encourage you all to be expecting that this meeting is going to be going past 8:30. I don't see any way around that. Both of these are sizable, unless they're going to get pushed off to another meeting. So just to give everybody a break, we're going to do 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 7:27. Thank you. And if not already done so, please, you may want to, everybody be sure that you are muted. All right. Nick, are you with us? And Georgina, are you with us?
I sure am. One moment.
Okay. Georgina, how about you?
I'm here.
All right. Let's go ahead and resume, please. So Nick, if you could go, please queue up Georgina's presentation.
Wow, that's psychedelic.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Do you see the first slide?
Yes.
Georgina, your audio has been kind of little distant, so maybe you can move closer to the mic.
Okay, I'll try and speak up too. Okay, so today we've had a lot to talk about already, but
Georgina,
can you hear me?
Georgina, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is there earlier when you were speaking, you were very clear, and then all of a sudden you came very distant as Perrette was just referring to, and you're remaining so. Is there, I don't know if that's just something that's glitching out on your mic or if there's something else you can physically do, but you remain pretty distant sounding.
No.
Okay. Then it is what it is. Okay, let's go ahead.
Okay, so we're talking about the water budget today. This is exciting because we're finally getting to see some of the output from the model. It begins to give us a story, add to the story that we know about the basin. And so my suggested reading on this water budget. Water budgets are required in the GSP. There is in the Code of California Code of Regulations, the SIGMA requirements, we have to do a water budget. There's a best management practice. If you want to know all there is to know about water budgets, there's a document. You can click on that link to read up on that. The objectives for today are to understand what is a water budget and what are its components in the Santa Margarita Basin. And they'll go a bit over the GSP requirements for water budgets and the overall basin water budget. I'll be talking about that and which areas have had the greatest changes in the water budget. And then we'll dive in a little bit deeper if there's time here into looking at one of the sub areas with the greatest changes in its water budget over time. Our requirements are that the water budget must be an inventory of all inflows and outflows into the basin and not just net values. That means that for example, there's flows into and out of creeks from groundwater, and you don't give the net value. You've got to say what the inflows are and what the outflows are, and you'll see that in the tables and charts that I show you coming up here. We need to provide a water budget of groundwater budget and a surface water budget. Both of those. Some people would just think, well, this is a groundwater management plan, it should be just groundwater, but there is a surface water component, part of the cycle that we have to include. And then water budgets in the GSP are shown as annual estimates, so annual values by water year. And you'll see that, that's what you're going to see charts of water year. But that does exclude seasonal variations. So if we want to look at the seasonal variations, and that might be important for when it comes to base flows and creeks, that seasonal variation is very strong, and that's what this groundwater dependent ecosystems rely on. We can look at it at that level, but what I'm showing you today and what will be in the GSP is an annual estimates. They want us to show annual and cumulative changes in groundwater and storage, and then, if applicable, estimate groundwater overdraft, and then we also use the water budget to help us with the sustainable yield. But that's sometime down the line, that's not tonight. So also required is that is required that there is a water budget for the entire basin. You only need to give ins and outs for the entire basin, but we're going to include sub-area budgets because that is it's more informative for us in the way that the basin groundwater levels are different in different parts of it and in different aquifers as well. We're also required to provide a historical condition budget or a historical water budget, a current water budget, and a projected conditions water budget. Now, this presentation will only include water budget information for the historical and current periods. Once the future model simulation has been developed with the PMAs that we're going to include in the GSP, the projected water budget will be developed. And also just to remember that a balanced water budget does not prove sustainability. It's only one component that helps us identify these different aquifer interactions. But what really defines sustainability is avoiding undesirable results. So what is a water budget? I'm going to describe it by using by a box. So if you have a box, it's got some water in it. You pour water in the top, and the same amount of water comes out the bottom. You haven't lost any water or you haven't gained any water in this box. There would be no change of storage. But if you put water in the top and less water came out the bottom, well, that meant that you've gained water inside your box and your water level will probably have gone up, and that reflects the change in storage. So that is very simply what a water budget is. But what happens if there's only water poured in one part of that box? So we split the box in two here. Now we have two water budgets, and this side has each half gets its own water budget, has its own inflows, outflows, and change in storage. You can see here this different change in storage. But the flow from the left cube goes into the right cube, and so this is equal. The amount going out of this one and into this one is equal. So this is groundwater budgets are linked through this kind of a flow. If we continue to split this box up into more and more cubes, we end up with a numerical model, a groundwater flow model, and that's exactly how the model works. It's got all these inflows and outflows, and each cube has got 6 sides. It's got all different flows going in and out. And in the model, we specify what these flows are from. Are they from outside of the basin? Are they from within the basin? Are they return flows? And the next slide will go into them. These are all the inflows and outflows. So it's pretty complicated. All these calculations happen in this one box of the model, a little cell. And if we aggregate all of these in every model cell,
then we can get the water budget of a sub area. So Rick says he can't understand. Does nobody hear me clearly?
You suddenly got clear.
Georgina, as a quick admin note here, you're good to go for right now. Just what I may ask you to do in the future here is unmute yourself and then remute yourself while you're talking, because that basically modifies what your microphone will pick up. But for right now, you're good to go. Please continue.
Georgina, it got better. It got better about a minute ago.
Okay. Great. Thanks for letting me know. Because I am talking fast, there's a lot to get through here, and I know that you've all looked at these slides already because they're so interesting. So there's all these many items to track, and many are independent, and difficult to estimate. And so that's why we use a groundwater model to come up with the water budget. And that's why it's taken this long for me to present this to you. So this is another view here of, this is from the DWR guidance documents of best management practices of all the inputs and outputs that they're expecting in general from water budgets. And I'm not going to go into it too much now because you'll see all these ins and outs, but particularly for the Santa Margarita Basin, this is a very generalized thing. So I'm going to rush on to the next one. So this is the first time that we're seeing some kind of a budget, and it's not a surface water budget and it's not a groundwater budget. It's a what I call a precipitation budget, because I think this is interesting that what happens to the precipitation in the basin or rainfall when it falls within the footprint of the basin. So when that happens, we find that about 40% is evapotranspirated away, and then 40% of it becomes runoff, and 20% of it becomes groundwater recharge. Now, this is quite significant because most other basins have groundwater recharge of the order of 5 to 10% of rainfall. And this is attributable to the Santa Margarita sandstone, which is incredibly permeable, as you've heard over and over. And so that's why this basin is very unique in that, I guess maybe deserts might have the same amount, I'm not sure, but they don't have very much rainfall. So this is a good amount of recharge that happens across the entire basin. I'm going to stop here quickly if there's anyone has questions.
Any questions from folks? Okay, seeing none and hearing none, let's go ahead and proceed.
Okay, so we're going to go here. There's a series of slides here.
Hold on, wait. Lou Ferris has got a question. I apologize. Lou, go ahead, please.
Sorry, it took me a while to hit the button. Looking at the total precipitation versus the evapotranspiration amount, that 40% that goes up because it evaporates, as the temperature rises, how fast does that percentage go up?
We haven't looked at it at that kind of level. We're looking at a very gross average level here. It's an average across 34 years of the model from 1985 to 2018. And so, but yes, it does go up. Obviously, it goes up with temperature a lot.
Well, that's what, yeah, since we're talking about climate change and we know the temperatures, the average temperature per year is going up. I mean, if it goes up 10 degrees, how much does that 40% go up?
Exactly, and we'll find that out when we do the projected water budget. So we take into account temperature and rainfall when we do the climate change part of the future scenario. So we'll be able to see from compared to this period, we have a projected period which has to go to 2072. We'll be able to see what that looks like, how that changes. Yeah.
And I'll just call attention as Georgina's changing to Jeff's comment that prior presenter, I'm presuming Sean, had said that it was a 4% increase per degree. So we can double back around to confirm that. Go ahead, Georgina.
You've got a good memory, Dave. So.
No. It wasn't me. It was Jeff Koopman. I can't remember what I had for dinner tonight.
Oh, okay. Now I'm going to go on to the surface water budget, and the inflows and outflows are listed here on this slide. And inflows are flows from outside of the basin, so up gradient flows, overland flows, the flows that I've just talked about there, the direct runoff that you get from falling on the basin, rainfall falling in the basin, and then you get groundwater that discharges to the streams and creeks. The outflows are the recharge of stream flow into groundwater and then stream flow out of the basin. There are other smaller components that are direct stream diversions. These are very difficult to measure because they're mostly private users and they don't report very well or very often, so we're just assuming those are negligible. And evaporation from the surface of the water as well is small. But one thing that the model doesn't include is riparian evapotranspiration. So surface water that is used by the riparian vegetation along the river corridors, it is taking out some water as well. And that is something that we could add in a future iteration of the model if we thought it was really important. This is what the
distribution of those components are for this basin. When we look at inflows, we have 59% of the inflows come from outside of the basin. So surface water flows, nearly 71,000 acre feet comes into the basin. You add in the direct runoff, and then also 18% of the basin's surface water inflow comes from groundwater itself, which is pretty large. But you also do get a little bit of losses in different locations and at different times, about only 7%. So the net here is there is much more that is groundwater that's flowing into creeks than is being lost from the creeks. And then a large portion of, or the remainder of what isn't going into groundwater flows out of the basin down to Santa Cruz. So this table up here is showing you the difference between the historical and the current period. I didn't point out the historical period is 1985 to 2018. This is a period where we have good data. We don't have data, really good data before 1985, and so that's why the model starts in 1985. And the current period is 2010 to 2018. This is you have to select a more current period, and this is important that we considered that the recent drought plus 2017 being a very wet year and some average years in there. So that's whenever you see the current period, it's 2010 to 2018. What's important to see here is that the amount of surface water inflow between the two different periods is less happening in the current period. And that's because the rainfall over this period here, over the 9 years of this period, is 1.5 inches less than over the historical period. So there's less rainfall. That means there's less surface water. And you'll see in the subsequent slides that are coming up that there's then also less recharge going into the ground from precipitation. Okay, I'm going to go on to show you. We're going to pause after this one, and I do see there's some questions. So this is the annual surface water budget. So each water year, the colors you see in the back here, these browns and yellows and blues, these are the type of water year classification. So you can see that the very wet years, these blue years, these blue colored on the background, correspond with the highs inflows from outside of the basin, and then of course a lot of water leaving the basin as well. And the magenta color is runoff, and the stream bed recharge that you see here, this is the flow that is coming from groundwater into the creeks, is the green. And then the small amount, the stippled light green at the bottom here, is the groundwater, the stream bed recharge, how much is recharging the underlying groundwater. So I'm going to stop here, see if you have any questions on this.
Okay, we're going to go to Jeff Kubin. Go ahead, please, Jeff.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question. First of all, the comment is on the amount that's recharging back into the streams here. I would guess that if this is based on the model output, but I would guess that if you actually looked at if you were able to measure this in detail, the amount of water flowing back into the creeks is probably less during the winter and more during the summer, and maybe it reaches this average here that is shown here. But the other thing is that in the previous slide, we were looking at water flowing out of the aquifer is substantially larger than the amount of water flowing into the groundwater, and yet we know our well levels are stabilized at this point. So how do we get 18% out of the aquifer and 7% into the aquifer and yet end up with stable well levels? There must be water going in or out some other place, and I'm wondering where that is.
So remember, again, this is the surface water budget, not the groundwater budget. So when we get to the groundwater budget, then the change of storage that you get there reflects the water levels. This does not reflect water levels because this is surface water.
So this is coming in from, for instance, rainfall away from the streams, is what you're saying?
Yes. So this direct runoff is is rainfall that falls out here and then eventually goes into the streams.
Okay.
And these numbers that you see here, the 21, 500 and this, you'll see this when we come to the groundwater budget, because these are also part of the groundwater budget. I'll point it out to you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Anything else, Jeff? You had a comment, or that was it?
No, that was it. That worked. Thanks.
All right, very good. I don't see any other questions or comments, Georgina, so let's proceed, please.
Okay, this is the groundwater budget now. So the inflows to the groundwater system are the recharge from rainfall. Also, there's recharge happens, return flow when you irrigate, landscape irrigation, whatever irrigation, and there's an ineffective part of your irrigation that becomes a return flow. Not all of it is taken up by the plants and evapotranspirated. Some of it, overwatering, causes this. You get return flows. Then there's the stream bed recharge to groundwater. We've talked about that. Then there's this system loss return flows. System loss return flows are those are losses in usually the municipal water systems, in their sewer systems, and in water line transmission lines that leak. And you've heard about that. This happens in this basin and everywhere. This happens, and a certain amount of that leaks out of the pipes and eventually makes its way into the groundwater. The system return flows we've talked about, and then there's also some flows that you get into the basin from adjacent basins. Outflows in the system are, in fact, I have this struck out, riparian evapotranspiration. What you got in the packet had that in there, but I took that out because we don't have that in the model. The model doesn't handle that. And that is groundwater use by riparian vegetation. So you get both surface water use and groundwater use, but as you can imagine, that is a very difficult thing to estimate. And obviously, groundwater pumping, we have that in the model, and that's a big component of the water budget, and that's all different kinds of pumping. It's everything that's happened: municipal pumping, domestic pumping, quarry pumping, any industrial, the remediation pumping, agricultural, whatever it is in there. Then you have the groundwater discharge back into the streams, and then the subsurface outflows to adjacent basins. Okay, so the block diagram here, many more components here, much more complicated than the surface water budget, right? So, but what I can tell you is the flows in and out of the basin are very low. You can see they're, you know, 100, between 100 and 200, you could say. Very little. The basin is fairly contained there. A lot of our groundwater leaves in the surface water. So when it flows out, where do we have it? Here, stream bed recharge. No, other one. Where's the, sorry, I'm seeing so many arrows here. Discharge to creeks, right here, this one, this red one. This is the 21,500 that I talked to you about before in the surface water budget. Here it is. 85% of all the outflows of groundwater is to creeks. It's much more than what is pumped by wells, which is only 15% of outflows. So that was very interesting to see. Then there are, you know, the big source of recharge to the aquifers. 57% comes from precipitation, and then the next biggest is the stream bed recharge. So it is much less than what goes into the stream. So this is where you could do the net. You could work out what the net stream flow interaction is here, but there's much more than double going into the creeks than is leaving the creeks and into groundwater. Although that makes up 36% of groundwater's inflows. And then there's all these return flows that I talked about, and system losses and from the quarries and things like that. And all of that together is about 7% of inflows to the basin come from these return flows. So you can take home anything, it's that most of it comes from precipitation. Next biggest is from stream bed recharge, but it's still a small amount. And the two outflows I talked about, groundwater pumping
and discharged to creeks. Okay. Here we have, this is the historical and current average water levels over that 34-year period. And you can see that since the current year, since 2010, sources of groundwater inflow are overall lower. Like I mentioned to you, there's 1.5 inches less rainfall per year that happened in this period compared to the historical period. But the distribution of different components remains generally the same. There is this change of storage at the bottom. So you have your inflows and outflows, and the difference between those is a change of storage. So there's been a large basin-wide change of storage over this period here, and that is reflected in the groundwater levels that you see that have plummeted in certain parts of the basin. So this is significant, but in the current period, there has been a gain of about 70 acre-feet per year over this 9-year period. So that is promising. And this is the chart that shows you the annual components relative to each other. I think what I'll point out here, there is a lot of information here, and I would suggest you take time to go and look at these in your own time, because you'll learn a lot from them that I can't tell you in a presentation like this. But what I do want to point out are these black lines. The black lines are showing you the change in storage. This is the annual change in storage here, the solid black line. So when you see that there's a 0 value here, anything above this is an inflow, and everything down of that is an outflow. And when the change of storage is above the 0 line, that means that there's been a gain of storage for that particular year. But when you add these all up, so this is a negative, this is a slight positive, and when you add this up, it becomes a cumulative change in storage, groundwater in storage. And you can see that we end up with around nearly 30,000 acre-feet lost for storage over the 34-year period that you see here. I'll stop here to get questions before I continue on this slide.
Okay, in our queue is Rick, followed by Lou, then Ruth, and then Doug. So Rick Rogers, go ahead.
Thank you. Georgina, your slide 16, where you show the breakdown of the system loss and septic systems, and you contribute that to the groundwater budget. How are you separating out, like, for SLV, where we're somewhat at annually 50% surface water? Just a basic number, just to split it like 50-50, or, I don't know. I'm just curious if that's not all groundwater, is it?
Are you talking, which return flow are you talking about? Like system losses?
Yeah, system losses and from septic systems.
Okay, from septic systems, we estimated how many septic systems there were, and then we know how much those use, how much was houses generally use. It's the less than half an acre foot a year, whatever that Sierra was talking about. And we had some assumptions of how much of that becomes return flow. And then in the areas where you serve the water, we use your water deliveries in total, both surface water and groundwater. We add them together, and then we have a proportion of that becomes the system losses.
Okay, so you did actually use actual numbers. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, no. In the model, we try and be as exact as we can, because we had trying to calibrate or to match real world water levels. So we have to try and be as accurate as we can. Yeah.
So one could say basically 6% of our water goes back.
Yes, but there's irrigation return flows that you could add into there. Right. That also goes back. And then this quarry return flow is quite a lot, because whatever they use to wash the sand
that was allowed to percolate back into the ground. This has declined because now there's only one quarry, but so now it's much less than this. This is the average over the period when the quarries were operating. But yeah, in total, say you could say about 6% in total is returned. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to Lou.
Yeah, on the same slide, number 16, you've got subsurface inflow and subsurface outflow at less than 1% each. Is that an exchange of water between aquifers? What
No,
is that?
that is between different basins.
So where would the outflow from the Santa Margarita go?
There's in and out with the Mid-County Basin, Santa Cruz Mid-County.
Got it.
There's quite a long boundary between the two.
It's basically driven by gravity?
Well, difference in groundwater elevations, yes. Yeah. It's hydraulic gradients.
Right. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Ruth, please.
I'd like to drill down a little bit further into the, oh, sorry. I'd like to drill down a little bit further into the septic inflow. And I remember John saying something of 50% or more of the summer flow of the San Lorenzo had once been in a septic system. And I'm wondering, due to the layout of where the septics are they're concentrated close to the river, do you think that that flow stays in the basin very long?
No, I think that there's evidence, like John has said earlier tonight, that where it is in sandy soils, it does come out. It does enter the rivers, and it becomes, so this septic system flow becomes part of this this groundwater that flows into the creeks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
it's sort of a temporary movement.
You know, if it's like in the area where there's Monterey shale, that's not going to have the same effect as if it's somewhere that's near in the Santa Margarita sandstone and near a creek. Well, then it's a good chance it's going to end up in that creek. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Good on that, Ruth? Okay, very good. All right, let's go to Doug,
Yeah.
and then to Angela, and then to Dale. Doug, go ahead.
Thanks. Georgina, I wanted to look at 17 and 18 for just a second and make sure I'm thinking about these the right way, or have you tell me how I should think about them. I was trying to correlate the numbers on 17 to the end state on 18, and in particular, just picking as an anchor the cumulative change in storage. I would have expected the end point on the dotted line to be at about, call it 37,000 acre feet to the bad. But instead I see on 18, it's more like 28,000 acre feet to the bad in 2018. So what am I thinking wrongly here in terms of trying to correlate these two?
So I have to have a look how this was calculated, but I think this is the average. The average over the period.
And so then the cumulative change would have been the maximum, would have been the low point?
Yes.
Well, that doesn't make sense. Oh yeah,
Well,
because that does kind of correlate to where it was in 13, 14 back there.
Right.
Okay. All right, that's helpful.
Okay.
That answers my question.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go to Angela, and then Dale, and then John.
So could you go to the next slide?
Oh.
Yeah. So
No,
I was
this
just back one. Yeah, that one. So I was just kind of curious. The brown section that says groundwater pumping, is that all agencies or?
Oh yeah, that's everyone. That's all the pumping that I mentioned in the other slide on the components. Everyone's
So I would
pumping.
actually be curious just to kind of, because like the septic usually pertains to private well owners. right? In
Well,
most-
no, a very big portion of the septics actually comes from the more densely populated areas within the San Lorenzo Valley Water District.
So I was just kind of curious, you know, because like one of the things that we always kind of bring up is the fact that, you know, most people with private wells have septics, which then kind of refreshes the aquifer. So I was just kind of curious in relation to groundwater pumping from a private well owner perspective compared to the septic return flow of private well owners, what that looks like. So I was just curious if that brown was everybody or just private well owners. So that answered the question.
Okay, I can tell you roughly. What happens if you take a look at section 2, there is a summary of all the groundwater users in the basin and how much they pump. And in there's a table that says the private well owners are pumping about 300 acre-feet a year out of the entire basin. And now if you were to work out how much of their, about 200 of that becomes return flow on average, roughly. So that's the magnitude you're dealing with. And then the rest, the other 1,000 is from people within the San Lorenzo Valley Water District service area.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, very good. Let's go to Dale and then John.
So Georgina, how do you quantify the private pumpers if they're not metered? How are you arriving at that number?
So John talked about earlier tonight how that we've looked at small water systems, and we looked at how many connections they have and what their reported pumpage is every year. And we are assuming that the geography is the same, the usage is typically the same for private well owners. And so we've come up with an acre foot, and it ranges from 0.5 to 0.28 acre feet per year. And we have assigned those values for every single year that you see on this chart. And so that's what we've used. And so then, and then we multiply that by the number of private wells, maybe 780 or so in this basin, and you do the math that way. Does that answer your question?
You good, Dale?
Yes, thank you. Did you say that was 300 acre feet a year?
The private well owners, yeah, roughly that. Yeah, 295 actually. But it's give or take, because yes, it's a difficult thing because we don't know every single private well and we don't know their usage, so we do have to make these assumptions. That's why it would be nice to have some wells metered just so that we got an idea. But in lieu of that, we use the small water systems, and I think that works out well too.
All right, let's go to John Ricker.
I just wanted to follow up on Ruth just to make sure the numbers are accurate. I said that it was 15% of the river flow came through septic systems. That's 15%, not 50%. And that's during low flow periods. So that's in September when the flow in the river is low. So the proportion of septic return flow is the highest at that time of the year. And that's coming from the whole San Lorenzo Valley. All of the service area for San Lorenzo Valley Water District is essentially on septic systems. So that's all coming back into the ground and then eventually into the river.
All right, thank you. Okay, Georgina, any last comments here?
Nope. Let's get on to the next bit.
Okay, well, let's do a point of order here. Chris Perry, I'm going to look to you. We are at 8:07. We probably have another 40 or so, 45 minutes of another presentation, plus we have remaining agenda items. So we are yet again at another point where we have to make a decision to somehow table something or to proceed and get everything done tonight. So Director Perry, I'm going to look to you first to see if you've got anything to weigh in on that.
I would vote for plow ahead.
Okay, are there any
we
board
get
members
going.
that, are there any board members that would have to move off, particularly such that we would lose a quorum?
I would put the caveat to plow ahead, and if we fall on our faces, we fall on our faces later tonight.
All right, anybody opposed to that? Okay, hearing none, plow ahead. Georgina, you're up.
Okay, so the change of storage that you see on here is for the entire basin, right? So if we look at the change in storage for different sub areas, that might help us pinpoint where there are more losses in groundwater and storage than in other areas. And so the next slide does that. So here you see each of these charts shows the cumulative change in groundwater and storage for each aquifer. Even though Monterey is not an aquifer, it's included because it's sandwiched between the Santa Margarita and the Lompico, so it's in there. And what you see are different colored lines. So the Santa Margarita is 4 different lines, and each line here corresponds with the sub areas I shared with you last month. And the colors of the sub areas are the colors that you see. So the red here would be Quail Hollow, this is Quail Hollow, and this is its change in storage. Again, there's a 0 line over here, and anything above it is a cumulative increase in storage, and anything below it is a decline. So and these sub areas, if you remember, we're looking at the water budget separately in each of these because they're typically unique features in those areas. So the Quail Hollow sub area is fairly isolated from other sub areas. It's not really connected, but all the other sub areas do interact with each other. You got to bear that in mind. They're not all isolated sub areas. So the charts show that apart from Quail Hollow in the Santa Margarita one, it stayed above 0. It's very close to 0 at the end of this period, but all the others have had an overall cumulative decline in storage, including the Olympia sub-area, which was a little surprising to me, but it's lost about 1,000 acre-foot over the 34-year period. The sub-areas south of Bean Creek have, okay, so these are the areas south of Bean Creek. These are the pink and this kind of yellowy peachy color. Those are below the 0 line. In the Monterey, you see the blue here varies quite a lot. And it's, as you see, the same variations happen here, and they correspond to the wet years, and the declines correspond with the dry years, because the Santa Margarita is reacting very quickly. The Monterey is exposed in a big portion of this north of Bean Creek sub-area. And so you see it does the same thing, although the scales on here are very different. So this is 3,000 here, and this is 2,000, but it's really only, it's not fluctuating as much as the Santa Margarita change in storage. The Lompico Aquifer has the greatest loss of storage over time in the Pacientempo, Camp Evers, South and Central Scotts Valley sub-area. So the long mouthful, I'm just going to call it Pacientempo, but it does cover a bigger area than Pacientempo. And we expect this because we see in the groundwater level hydrographs that show the declines that are similar to this. But the other sub-areas, these ones relative, the north one and this one, North Scotts Valley, those haven't had as much of a change. But as you see, if you look again, the scale, this is 20,000, this is 3,000, this is 2,000. So this is a huge amount. If we zoomed in here, you'd probably see similar fluctuations over here. But the Lompico Aquifer is not recharged as well as the Santa Margarita is being at the surface. The Butana Aquifer over on the fourth one has also had loss of groundwater and storage. And again, most of its exposure to the surface is over here in this blue area along the Zayante Fault on the northern part of the basin. And so again, it's receiving direct precipitation recharge, and so you do see it vary more than some of the other areas. In this one,
the peach line here in this area, it's 1,000 feet deep. So you don't see these responses to different climatic years. Let's see. So the next set of slides is going to focus in on the passing tempo. So I'm using these to kind of show you where the problem areas are. And this is no surprise to any of us. We know that the impacts have mostly happened around south of Bean Creek. And so let's explore that a little further. But before we do, I'll stop here and see if anyone has questions about these ones.
Okay, any further questions at this time? Go ahead and get
Yeah, I have. So in the upper left-hand quadrant, there's 2 charts that show that rainfall is refilling the areas of the aquifer during periods when there's heavy rain. And then there's 2 plots, the pink and the yellow, that are flatter. Do you know where that water is going that's raining on them? I'm presuming it's going down into the Lompico and the Butano is what's going on.
Yeah, so these are in the area. No, this Santa Margarita here is at the surface in the Scotts Valley area. It is got less permeable surface because it's more urbanized. And so that's probably why you're not seeing as higher peaks. Plus, it's a very small area of Santa Margarita here. You know, this is completely is completely Santa Margarita exposed. There's no other formations over it. Even this the Olympia sub area that has other formations over the top of it that means that there is less actual surface exposure, and so you see that muted as well. But these ones, the pink and the peach color, those ones have less chance for direct recharge of rainfall because of more permeable surfaces.
So you're saying they're paved over, so it's hard for the water to get in.
Yeah.
Okay. I know there's a lot of mudstone covering the green area is heavily covered by mudstone, but where it is exposed, the water is going in. Yeah. Yeah.
So the mudstone is on the very top ridges between the creeks, right? And the Santa Margarita sandstone is where the creeks are, and a little bit up the side of the valleys.
So if you took the chart in the lower left-hand corner, the yellow line, and if you normalized it to the general down slope that's occurring, there are some bumps in there that are significant. And if you put it at the same scale as the chart in the upper left-hand corner, I think that you would see that those peaks are actually relatively large in relation to the upper left-hand corner. And what you'll find is that the Lompico is filling significantly, and the Butano, during those rainfall events that are occurring in the upper left-hand corner, that the water is actually falling through down into the lower aquifers instead of filling the upper aquifer. I think that's what this is telling us.
Yeah, and a lot of this, it's hard the scale that things are put at, but if we did plot it, well, these wouldn't vary that much. They're less than probably 500, you know, from, I'm not going to get into it. I know what you're pointing out, and that's a good point. It is, the Lompico is recharged from what's above it, and you'll see that in the upcoming slides.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's, oh wait, Chris, go ahead, and then we'll maybe move on. Chris Perry, go ahead.
Sorry, but that's only true in certain areas. There are certain areas where the Monterey is between the Lompico and the Santa Margarita.
Yeah, but it's still
only some areas where there's contact between the Santa Margarita and the Lompico.
Right, but the Lompico gets a little bit of water from the Monterey as well.
Right. It's more of an aquitard in certain ways.
Right. Yep.
Okay, let's proceed, please.
Okay, so here we have, now we're looking at the average numbers that are associated with just that sub area. So we're zooming into just the sub area, and you can see the current and historical
water budget, the inflows, outflows, and change in storage. Flow from others. So here where you see, there's something different in here though, that it wasn't in the basin-wide budget, and this is the flow from other sub areas. So the inflows to that sub area are from the north. So from the North Scotts Valley sub area, there is about 1,500 acre feet coming in from the north. And then there's flow to other sub areas flowing out of this sub area, and that is actually flowing across Bean Creek into the north of Bean Creek sub area. That's the way groundwater flows, is north in this area. So, you know, they're very similar. A little bit gets left behind because there's more flowing in than is flowing out. About 200, 300 acre feet gets left in. So that's a little different. So also noticeable is that the pumping in this area has declined quite a lot, and this pumping is all pumping. Again, like I said before, it's municipal pumping, it's pumping for remediation, it's quarry pumping a lot. There's a fair bit of quarry pumping happening. There's a few private wells. All of that is lumped in here, and as a result, you see there is still declining accumulative change in storage that is declining in this sub area, and you'll see that on the next chart. I'm actually going to go right away to that one. So, oh no, I'm going to stop here because the next 4 slides are the bar charts for each aquifer. I'm now looking at each aquifer, so I'll stop and see if there's any questions on this one before I go on to the aquifers.
Hey, Jeff, go ahead, please, with your question.
Yeah, so Perry commented about the Monterey blocking the aquifers connection. It's important to notice that the Monterey is missing underneath Scotts Valley in a large area. So there's a large section of the Santa Margarita that is connected to the Lompico, and both of those are low permeability aquifers. So the water flows out of the Santa Margarita down into the Lompico, right underneath Scotts Valley, where all Scotts Valley's wells are. It's like a bathtub drain on the Santa Margarita, and you end up with a large dewatered area of Santa Margarita underneath and surrounding Scotts Valley as the water flows down into the Lompico, where you have your depletion region where you've pumped 30,000 acre feet out of the ground.
There's also a large section of Scotts Valley that has the Monterey under it, all through.
North. Yeah.
Yeah, north end.
No. Okay, I'd like to clear that up, Jeff. It's not a large portion of the southern part of Scotts Valley. It's like less than half of it. It doesn't extend like all the way to Bean Creek. On the map that you look at in the section 2 report, well, you'll see there it's less than half of that sub area it does not have Lompico.
Yeah, but that is a sandy aquifer, and so if you have like 60 feet of waterhead in that area and it's 100, 200 feet away from where it's open, the water will flow sideways and over to where the water will pour out. It's like a bathtub drain. If your water levels show that in the Santa Margarita, it's dry in that whole region down there.
Yes, you can say that. And you if I do get to the next presentation, you will see some evidence of that as well.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and proceed, please.
Okay, now I'm looking particularly at each aquifer to see how the water budget in each aquifer has changed over time. There are 4 charts in the series for each of the aquifers. The Santa Margarita chart here has the greatest volumes. It has the most water flowing in and out of it because it's recharged more readily than the others. And so you'll see here the y-axis is 6,000 here, and all the others are going to be much less. So the decline in groundwater levels or in storage occurred mostly in this aquifer in the 1980s. And then since then, you know, it's been fairly, it hasn't continued its decline, let's say. And so it's very similar now to what it was at the lowest point in 1990s. So that's a good thing that it hasn't
it hasn't declined more, but it also hasn't increased more. And partly it's to do with the downward movement through the Santa Margarita into the underlying formations that Jeff was talking about. Okay. I'm going to go on to the Monterey Formation. You know, here you see the scale. This is 2,500. It's not readily recharged in this sub area because it's overlain by Santa Margarita, and most of its recharge is from the overlying Santa Margarita. So it's recharge here. So you see here in these charts we have flow from other aquifers. So this reddish color at the top is the flow coming from the Santa Margarita. And its decline in groundwater in storage is very similar to what you'll see on the next slide for the Lompico aquifer. So moving on to that Lompico aquifer, this is different again from the previous because this decline in storage was so big we couldn't put it on the same scale as all the bars. If you look here, this is 20,000, that's just 4,000. It's on its own scale because if we plotted them together, the bars were so small you couldn't actually see what was happening there. But what is noticeable is that the groundwater pumping in the Lompico aquifer is the component that dominates this chart. You can see that there's been more pumping than there has been recharge, and that has led to this decline. And so the pumping that's happening here is there's quarry pumping from the Lompico. There was quarry pumping from the Lompico. There is Menania Woods pump from this. San Lorenzo Valley Water District pumps from it, and Scotts Valley Water District pumps from this aquifer. But you can in this sub area, but you can see that the pumping has definitely dropped off over the years, and that storage is flattened out since about the middle of the drought. This is the Butano aquifer one, and I have to apologize. This chart needs quite a bit of work. It's not accurate, and so I can't delete it because it's in the packet, but next time you see it, it's going to look a lot different. And it's a complicated modeling issue. In this sub area, the Butano is combined with some other formations, but we're going to have to try and tease just the Butano out to get a better reflection of what's happening. So I'm not even going to go further into this, but the next time you see it, we'll have a better water budget for it. But I'm going to go back to this one to see if there are any questions on the series of individual aquifer slides I showed.
Okay, opening the floor. We need to keep things moving along here. Anybody want to get into the queue? All right, seeing none, Georgina, let's get back to you.
Okay, so I've shown you what I'm going to show you today. Again, it was high level. We can go into a whole lot of detail on these slides, down to, you know, who's pumping, of the pumping, who's pumping what portion. We can look at all sorts of things. But this is the first time you're seeing the water budget. And so I did want to keep it that higher level and sort of make it as general as possible. So the things that struck me when I put this together is that, so the current water budget over the last 9-10 years, there has been this less inflow because of less rainfall. Who knows what the future is going to bring? But already we've seen over the last 9 years there's less rainfall. That means less groundwater, less surface water for everyone. Surface water generated by rainfall falling in the basin is almost equal to the evapotranspiration. In your version, it said water flowing into the basin from upstream. That was incorrect. It's the evaporation. If you remember, 40% is evapotranspirated, 40% is runoff, and then the 20% was groundwater recharge. The groundwater flow into creeks and streams accounts for 18% of all the surface water inflows. And that same groundwater inflows to creeks accounts for 85% of all the groundwater outflows. And this was, to me, it's quite a big number, and I was surprised. And then
all the return flows equal about 7% of groundwater recharge. And then and what we see in the changes of groundwater storage mirror the changes that we see in groundwater levels observed in wells. And what I wanted to ask all of you was, do you have any highlights from this presentation that struck you that we could add to this? Something that you thought, oh, well, I didn't know that, and that I haven't pointed out here already. So I'd like to hear from you on that, and also any other questions you have.
Okay, so want to hear what folks have to say about observations, whether you feel that there are differences that you've experienced or observed. So floor is open. Any commenters? All right, I am not seeing anyone weighing in at this time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we'll open the floor for the public. As Nick commonly says, members of the public, if you are on the phone, please at this time unmute yourself so you can get into the queue. Likewise, members of the public that are online, please go ahead and use the chat mode like we do for all of the participants. Okay, hearing none and seeing none, but we're going to come back to the board. And Georgina, I believe this concludes this presentation. Along the lines of what had been said by Chris. Chris, we have one more presentation plus a number of other items on the agenda. Georgina, I don't even know whether it's in your professional opinion feasible to push the other presentation off to the next meeting, given that it's the model update. So, you know, we are at 8:30, and I expect us to have another 40 or so minutes of presentation plus a few other agenda items. So, Georgina, what are your thoughts about needing to proceed tonight despite the time versus having to push off? And I'm not advocating either, just checking in with you.
Yeah, I think this took an hour. I thought it was going to take 45 minutes. I apologize. So I think we should I'll try and do the other in about 20 minutes. I'm going to have to skip a few slides, but I think it is important because we have to start modeling, and I want to get input on what we plan to model. We can't wait till next meeting.
Okay, Nick, you're in the queue to say something, so go ahead, Nick Wallace.
Yeah, just a quick admin note, folks. It's obviously getting pretty late. I don't think I need to tell anybody that. But if you drop off for whatever reason, if you could kindly either let me know in the chat or alternatively shoot me an email just so I can maintain a good, clear administrative record and make sure that we actually have quorum going forward. I am tracking that there is potentially one more vote tonight.
All right, we are going to proceed. Go ahead.
Okay, so the next presentation is what we're planning to model when we're for the future scenarios, and it includes some projects, some potential projects, and management actions. So what I hope for you to take away from this is to understand the approach that we're going to be taking for these, to model these projects and management actions, and how we use this to support selection of ways to achieve sustainability in the basin by 2042. Now, the basic approach is that we don't actually have a project yet in the basin that's ready to go. So there are some potential projects that have been studied, but no decisions have been made on them. So we're not far along enough to be specific on the sources of water or volumes of water. However, the model doesn't care where the water is coming from. It doesn't need a specified model. It just needs to know that there is some water. What is that volume maybe going to be? Which locations is it going to be in the basin, and in which aquifers is it going to be put? And so our initial modeling approach is to estimate how much water is it going to take to recover lowered groundwater levels in the Santa Margarita and Lompico aquifers, especially in that area south of Bean Creek that we were just looking at, without causing any other negative impacts by 2042. So I am going to, I think, skip through this slide here, but
this is in a process that you see here. We're midway in the process of developing the projects and management actions, and this is a step in there. So I'm going to skip through that. In the model, what we're planning to do is there are 3 different mechanisms you can use for increasing groundwater levels. And you could do in lieu recharge, passive kind of recharge. You can do direct recharge into a specified or a targeted aquifer, or there you could do a stormwater recharge at the surface, say in the Santa Margarita aquifer. And I'm going to go into remind you what those are. So the in lieu or passive recharge is when a system with excess surface water, the system 1 here, has excess water supply in the winter, and it's able to provide some of that to another system, maybe its own another system within its service area, or a neighboring agency, and it can provide that water to them instead of them pumping water, groundwater. So you're allowing those wells to rest, and you're keeping that groundwater in storage. So if it's in the Lompico, which we're targeting here because it's the one with the biggest decline in storage, that we'd like to keep the groundwater in there. This is the cheapest of all the mechanisms, really, to because a lot of the infrastructure is in place already. This option here of direct injection is much more expensive than in lieu because a lot of new infrastructure is needed, but it's a direct way to get water into the targeted aquifer. So here you can see an injection well, and it's targeting the Lompico aquifer, and you can get water in there fairly quickly. Stormwater recharge is the next one, but this is an option that only recharges very small amounts of water, less than 100 acre-feet per year, whereas the other ones can do many hundreds of acre-feet a year. But here you would target the Santa Margarita aquifer. You could use a dry well or a recharge basin to infiltrate stormwater down through the unsaturated zone and down into the groundwater. I'll stop there. I see that I think Jeff has a question.
Yeah, so you talked about modeling with these different changes, but we obviously need to do a baseline model run where we do nothing, right? And then we see what this.
Yes.
And we also need to take into account the large number of projects that Scotts Valley has in the queue for growing their population. That needs to be factored in there. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about baselines, and I can start here, I guess. Well, let's go to the next slide here. See, these are the different projects that we're planning. They're not real projects. Some of they're ways to get the groundwater levels to rise a little. Some of them are just pure storage, and well, not storage, but replenishment, and others are injection and recovery, and others are in lieu. So we want to see what the effects of these are. But in all of these, we have to have a no project conditional baseline, and I've talked to you about that before. That is based off climate change, projected water demands into the future to 2072. We'll have to go. That's quite a stretch, but we have to do that as part of the GSP. And we will compare anything that we run to that. I'm going to show you some examples where that has been done, where you compare your results to a baseline, and that's just typical. Whenever you do model scenarios, you have to have no project condition. So there are 5, what you see in this table are 5 different model scenarios. The ones in gray have already been modeled, and we can learn a lot from what has already been done. And we haven't used our recent model to do these. These were done several years ago. City of Santa Cruz did some studies, and Scotts Valley Water District did some studies. But what we're proposing to model are these 3 here. And I am going to, in the next few slides, be talking to you about all of these as quick as I can. This is one of the projects already modeled. This is the City of Santa Cruz one, where they are planning, well, they're thinking about putting excess surface water that they have into the groundwater basin to store it, kind of a long-term storage that they will only extract it when they really need to augment their supplies in very dry years. So they would store every year a little bit, and then they would call on it and pull it out when they need it. This is the area that they've done the modeling in already, and it's just east of Hanson Quarry. So they were on average putting in about 780 acre-feet per year into the Lompico with injection wells. They'd have 9 wells in this area. And every year, it depends on how much water they have available to inject, but it could be anywhere from 100 to almost 2,000 acre-feet per year. And then on the years when they really need it, it again depends on how severe that drought is or how much water they need to augment. But they can in the model that they did, they can have up to 1,900 acre-feet per year of recovery. This only happens in the summer months, and this injection only happens in the winter months. So it's kind of 6 months that it's injected and 6 months it could be extracted. But this is not every year. This is only dry years. Okay, now this is a complicated chart, but it tells you a lot on how the basin responds to that injection. And these are similar charts that we will produce for the 3 model scenarios that we do and any other model scenarios we do. So these are charts showing different components of the water budget, the basin water budget, in response to ASR. And you see a black line here. This is the Lompico. We're going to start at this bottom one. This here is the net amount of water stored in the basin. So it's the amount of injection minus the amount of recovery. So these years here, you see they're injecting. There's no actual, because they're building up storage. The light blue is the storage. But then on the years where you see it dip down, they're extracting more than they're injecting. And in fact, the storage declines below the baseline. So these are the difference between the baseline condition and the ASR. So this is the difference in storage that you would see cumulatively. And so this black line is representing that net storage in the basin. Let me see. So the blue is a cumulative change in storage that happens when water is stored in the aquifer. And by injecting water into the Lompico, its interactions with other aquifers around it changes. And that's what this bottom chart is showing you. The green bars that you see here are showing a reduction of inflow to the Lompico from adjacent aquifers. So as you fill up the Lompico, it's not acting as a sink that Jeff was kind of saying. Sink is not really the right word, but it's got a lower head, so groundwater flows towards it. Now you're filling it up. Now those aquifers don't flow as much into it. So cumulatively, you have less water from the other aquifers flowing into it. Let me see, the gray bars show the cumulative increase in outflows from Lompico to evaporation, groundwater discharge to San Lorenzo River and other creeks. So there is more water being discharged to creeks when the groundwater levels in the Lompico rise up. And the red are labeled as boundaries here in the legend, but they're not the basin boundaries. They're model boundary conditions such as surface water flow to groundwater. And so there is now less leakage of the surface water to groundwater flow because the aquifer is fuller. Okay, so it's like this chain reaction. If you change something in an aquifer, it has all these repercussions to all the other things around it. Both the, this is a basin-wide actual water budget, but if we did this for a sub area, you would see also which of the sub areas is it affecting. The upper chart here is showing you those changes that happen to the Santa Margarita. Right, you're only injecting into the Lompico, but by injecting into the Lompico, you're having an effect on other aquifers. So there's a reduction in the amount of flow from the Santa Margarita to the Monterey Formation, and that's the green that you see. There's less flowing from Santa Margarita to Monterey because the groundwater levels below it are higher and there's less of a vertical gradient, and so you get less flow. And also note, though, that the scales are different. So the length of this, the volume that's in this bar isn't equal to the same length and volume in the Lompico. This is a much smaller impact. You'll see these would be smaller than this. So don't equate the length of the bar to be the same. Let me see. As a Lompico fills up, there's a corresponding slight increase in groundwater in storage. So that's the blue line here. You get a little bit of a few hundred acre feet cumulative change, and it kind of roughly corresponds to fluctuations that you see here with what's happening in the underlying Lompico. So storing water in the Lompico does have some benefits for the Santa Margarita aquifer. So with more water in the Santa Margarita aquifer, there's also increased flows to springs and creeks. And we also learned from the other model results for this scenario that injection wells located too close to Bean Creek result in groundwater levels coming above ground. So that you have to be careful where you site your injection wells, because you want to have enough available storage that you can actually put the water in there, that it doesn't spill out to the surface. So we can learn a lot from these model runs that have already been done. I'm going to stop here, see if anyone has questions.
Okay, opening the floor. Lots to absorb on this one.
There's a lot of information on this, yes.
So
pretty sure if you look closely enough, the launch codes are there. Let's go to Ruth. Go ahead.
So was this done with our current model, or was this done with an earlier version of the model?
Correct, an earlier version and several years ago now, yeah.
And do you think it would change substantially with the current model?
Not terribly much, no. In general, it would say the same, it would tell the same story. And at this point, what we're doing is just improving our understanding of how these aquifers interact with each other.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, go ahead.
So it is very confusing on the upper chart, the green bars going down, because the leakage to Monterey is actually declining. So
yes.
You have
That's
it in
why
the
it's
negative direction. I know it's shown in the negative direction. It's kind of hard to figure out what the cumulative, that is, you have to basically take the lower chart and subtract it from the upper chart in your mind to see what's happening, right? To figure out what the inflows are, because there's actually decreasing leakage to Monterey formation as you go to the right on that chart.
That's right, yes, because it's cumulative, yeah. But after about 2050, it kind of levels out then, so there isn't as much of a reduction of leakage to Monterey.
Yeah, there might be a better way to show that chart where that leakage pinches out as you go to the right. It's substantial in the beginning, and then it trades off. It trades off as these other ones come up. It actually goes into decline. In fact, it'd almost be that it would occupy the upper left corner where it's white on that upper chart, on the positive side of the chart. It would almost occupy that area, and as the other bars come up, it declines in response.
All right, this comes from another report, so yeah.
All right. Okay, any other questions or comments from folks? All right, let's proceed.
Okay, and then there are also, so that was the water budget effects. Now, if we look at the effects on or impacts on groundwater levels, there's 2 wells that are near the area where the recharge would happen. Well, the injection would happen here in this. One is the Pasión Tempo well 7 that is to the west, and the other is well 10A that is right in amongst the injection wells. And there are several lines on here I've got to explain. The top line is the ground surface, because when they did this analysis, it was important to see that this didn't come up to the surface, right? But then there's also a lot of lines on here.
They did many different scenarios using different climate change options. And they did ASR, they did in lieu, they did a combination of those two. And so that's what these different lines are. Now we're choosing their scenario 8, which is just the ASR only, because that was the same climate scenario that we're going to use. So we can comparing apples to apples here, right? And so the blue line that you see here represents this ASR using the same climate that we're going to use. The black line is the baseline, which is the no project line to compare against. And so in this well that's a little way away from the injection, you get about a 50-foot recovery in the beginning when they're injecting quite a lot of water. But then when they start to call on that water, when they start to extract it and recover it, you see groundwater levels go down below the baseline. And this probably is and even more so in the well that is right in amongst them, you get about 100-foot increase in groundwater levels. That's great, but when they start pumping it, it can be about 100-foot decline in groundwater levels, and that would clearly exceed our minimum thresholds. So one of the modeling scenarios we are planning to do does change the way the recovery is operated, and I'll talk about that when we get there. But so we learned from this as well. Okay, I'm going to go on to the second already modeled scenario where there is 560 acre-feet injected at El Pueblo Yard, which is kind of over here in the green circle. This is a study that Scotts Valley Water District did several years ago using the previous version of this model, and there's a change of groundwater and storage. This is groundwater levels just in this location. I don't know what was happening further away, but they showed that at the location where the water is injected, that there's about 150-foot increase in groundwater levels in the Lompico aquifer over 15 to 20-year period, and that there's this change in basin storage as well, and that you could put in 6,000 acre-feet of water in storage within 15 years, and you would get these increased flows to base flow. The basin on the aquifers are only so big. Once you've filled them, they're going to spill out to the creeks, and as you already know, 85% of all the groundwater outflows are to the creeks. So you would just increase that percentage the more water you kind of put into the basin. Okay, I'll stop there, see if anyone has questions.
I don't see anybody, so just checking in real quick.
Well, I think I've done my 20 minutes now, but
Go ahead.
so I'm going to go real quick here through the 3 modeling scenarios that we are planning to do. The one is the in lieu. Okay, this is the cheapest option, and it's the one that is kind of the no-brainer. We need to do this. We're going to put in 600, and we're going to, in winter, pump less, up to a 610 acre-feet, because we will say that in these areas, these wells will maybe pump as little as they can in winter, and then San Lorenzo Valley Water District and Scotts Valley Water District would use surface water instead, and see what that does to groundwater levels. How long does it take for groundwater levels to recover in Lompico using that mechanism? Okay, the next one we would do is a different operational scenario to the city of Santa Cruz ASR, where instead of this kind of long-term storage and then drawing on it in really dry years, to change that up, use the same injection, but this time extract out every year 80% of what you put in. They would leave 20% in the basin that eventually flows out like this in this direction and then into San Lorenzo River. So that is different from what they've done. We really don't want to copy anything that's already been done. We want to learn something new every time we do a model scenario. So this one is pretty much set up. We know where the wells are, we have the injection, we just have to extract it differently than in the previous modeling that they had done. And then we're also going to have a slight change in the Scotts Valley Water District scenario, where they are injecting
in this El Pueblo area. And this is purely, it's not storage and recovery. This is just replenish the basin, see how long that takes at 700, if you're injecting 710 acre-feet every single year, every month, how long does it take to recover the basin here in this option without causing too much groundwater coming to the surface or some negative effect that way. The Kennedy Jenks, who had done the previous modeling for them, they did not use the same climate scenario as City of Scotts Valley, City of Santa Cruz, or what we're going to be using in the GSP. And for our modeling, they use some other climate change, so it'll be important. This is higher than the 560 acre-feet that they used. And so we want to apply a higher number as kind of a bookmark and use the climate change to see what the responses are in the basin. I'll stop here to see if there are questions on these few.
Okay, I've got Frank. I'll come back to you just to stick with my protocols. I want to go ahead and make sure that we've got comments from all the board members first. So I commit to come back to you on your comment at the end of this presentation. So why don't you go ahead, Georgina?
Okay. There are some other smaller things that we may model, but these are very small volumes. The one is the stormwater recharge, putting that in a few different places, about 100 acre-feet per year in winter to see what happens. I really don't think there's going to be much of an impact, especially in the Lompico. It's not really going to impact the Lompico. It mostly is going to flow out to the creeks, I'm guessing, but it will be good to know that. And then this is not something that's being considered, but to understand what the sensitivity is of private well pumping in the Santa Margarita aquifer, that's about 175, and I already told you total private pumping is around 300. So in the Santa Margarita, those wells that are screened in Santa Margarita, we estimate it's about 175. If we were to take stop pumping in those and then say move that water to the Lompico, what would be the effect on the creeks? Again, I think this is going to be a very small amount, but we need to know this because people are speculating as to what happens. So it'd be good to have this run to say, well, this is what does happen according to the model. Okay, I'm just going to go on here. The model outputs used to evaluate. You've already seen some model outputs you can have. You can have these. You want to look at effects of groundwater levels. You'll have hydrographs like you saw in the earlier example where you compare against the baseline. You want to look at the rate and amount of Lompico aquifer recovery and also Santa Margarita aquifer recovery. You want to see, do levels rise too much? Like if the injection well's too close to the creek, does it rise to the surface? Is there any property damage? You know, we are concerned about the Hanson Quarry because a groundwater is only 50 feet below it, and if groundwater levels in that Santa Margarita there recover too much, they may damage something. And so we have to look at all of these things as well. And a big thing, obviously, effects on creek base flows. We see if, you know, what we do to the aquifers of Lompico and Santa Margarita, when we change things in them, what change does it have in the creeks? And then also always looking at the change in groundwater and storage for each of the sub areas. Okay, next steps, basically we're going to do the modeling. Here we have to start developing the baseline. I already talked about this, I'm not going to go into it more. And then we have to develop all the scenarios and present the results to you in at least more than 2 months from now. So we're going to be busy on this over the next 2 months. 3 months until early next year. Okay.
All right, let's go to Jeff and see if any other board members wish to weigh in, and then we'll close things out on this part. Jeff, go ahead. You're muted, Jeff.
Okay, sorry about that. In terms of the use, I got it. So in terms of the usage per independent well owner, I know I was talking with Ricker about this. By the way, I have to mention that when I saw elimination of private well owners' wells, I ended up with some phone calls and emails about that. I was surprised about that, and it turns out it's just a study. But based on the usage per home, I know that my usage per home is way under the amount that I saw there, and yeah, that's the net amount after taking septics into account, which really surprises me. I think that when you're looking at small systems,
wait. What is your net usage?
The number that you showed there was the net after septic tanks that were taken into account?
This is not per person, this is in total.
No, that's in total. I understand. That's in
Okay.
total of all the private well owners and
Yeah.
independent. So the independents, one of the things about when you're looking at the independents and trying to gauge what private well owners are doing and comparing to independents have.
What are independents?
Okay, so the small systems, sorry, I should use the right phrase.
Okay.
The small systems have, for instance, we have several small systems up Lockhart Gulch here, and they go for like most of the 3 miles up Lockhart Gulch. There's Mission Springs and there's Fern Grove Club and things like that. And when they have leakages, it's not a big deal for them to have pipe leakages, and then someday maybe they'll get around to them. So there may be a lot of water that's consumed in those systems that's leakage. Whereas an independent well owner, we pretty much go directly from our well to our house. There's not a lot of opportunity for us to have long runs of leakage going on that we don't know about. So I'm not sure that when I look at the numbers that you've assigned to their consumption per year, I know I'm not using that much water. I put my water in a 350 gallon. What's that?
Do you have a meter?
I don't have a meter, but I have a water tank, and it's very small. It's 350 gallons kind of net. And when I run out of power, it lasts me for days. So I know that I don't use very much water at my house, and my neighbors don't either. They've got well issues and everything. So so the numbers that we're assigning to our consumption, and not all of us. So there may be some people out there using a ton of water, but there are others that are using much less water than.
That's I'm sure. I totally agree. That's probably happening. The number we are using is a very average number. Until we have better data, that's what we have to go on. And we're not going to assign 2 acre-feet per year because that is unreasonable.
No,
Other
I think
people in other parts of the state are using 2 acre-feet just as their assumption because they don't know any better.
Wow. Yeah, I think I'm about 0.1 is probably our consumption. It's pretty small. But the other thing I want to ask about is the temperature, the climate modeling that we're going to be doing when we're modeling going forwards. I was talking with Ricker and Sierra about this a little bit. It seems like, is that one of the worst case scenarios for what the temperature and rainfall might be, or is it?
Yeah, you listened right to Sean talk about the scenario that we're using. You can go and look back at his presentation, and that's everything that you need to know is in there.
I thought it was kind of middle of the road scenario that he picked. I didn't think it was a worst case scenario that he picked.
It probably is not worst case, no. But I don't think anyone is really using a worst case scenario when they do this.
All right, let's move on to Lou. Go ahead.
Georgino, I'd like to thank you for those presentations tonight. I have found them both very informative and also very helpful in understanding the big picture. So again, thanks.
Thank you very much, Lou. It's been enlightening for all of us, including me, in fact. Yeah.
All right, other comments or questions? Thank you for that acknowledgement, Lou. That's very kind of you. Any other comments or questions from folks? Okay, hearing none and seeing none, we're going to move on to the public portion of comments. We have one in the queue. Frank, thank you for sticking things out. I see you're still with us, so we'll go to Frank, and then we'll check in with any other members of the public that might be on the phone or online, and then we will close things out. Go ahead, Frank.
Hey, I do a lot of meetings on Zoom, and a lot of times it's a presenter with a bunch of audience. A lot of times questions and comments can be handled through chat. It's more efficient, just takes less time. Just a quick suggestion. But I'm just curious, I noticed that there was discussion of diverting to surface water sources in Scotts Valley in the winter. I understand Scotts Valley does 100% pump and they have storage tanks, but I don't know of any reservoir or lakes or anything like that. Am I misinformed?
No, so they would get the water for San Lorenzo Valley Water District, who does have the surface water, and there is, there is an intertie, so they would have to change some arrangements, but that could facilitate that transfer.
Right, and then the Loch Lomond Reservoir is all City of Santa Cruz District. Did they own that?
But the San Lorenzo Valley Water District has a right to some of that.
Okay.
But again, I'm not talking about details. The modeling doesn't care whether really the
Yeah, no, I
politics
get
of
it.
the
I
water.
get it. I get it.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
Okay.
This is just a novice question, so I appreciate the information. Thank you.
Okay.
And real quick,
Frank,
real
Frank,
quick,
just so you know,
Frank, on the suggestion about doing chat, but we don't do that because it would be kind of a Brown Act problem.
You can record the chat with recording capabilities, so it's all.
Right, we don't do
documented.
it. Yeah, we
Okay.
don't do that.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
okay, so with that, Georgina, unless there's anything else that you have to cover, this will complete section 4.1.2, and I will hand things back over to Chairman Perry. Georgina, any last comments?
I do not. Thanks for sticking with me. So
Chairman
Okay.
Perry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgina, and that was all great. I echo what Lou said so graciously. Okay, here we go. We can do this. We can do this. The 4.2 Youth Outreach Program.
So I'm gonna make a suggestion here. I know it's I would hate to do it to Kelly, our fearless intern who's been working behind the scenes, but also I would hate for her not to get attention that this item deserves. That we could push both items 4.2 and 4.3 into November meeting. I just have to get a promise from this group and Georgina that we won't put it at the end of the agenda again where it could drop. But they are not time critical, with one exception, that youth outreach program. We are ready to go out there and cast a little larger net and get maybe some more participants. Kelly's going to run another round. And if all of you could be the ambassadors and cheerleaders out there in your communities and encourage young people. So what we're considering is high school and young adults, working adults, or going to Cabrillo or any of that up to 40. If you just get the word out there and put them in touch with, send them to our website or put them in touch with Kelly or Nick and just drum up some interest in that, then we could do the rest in November.
Okay, if everyone's game with that, I won't stand in the way. Okay, then do we just want to quickly have anyone have any questions about this, the financial report? Okay, I see a lot of head shaking no. Okay, the quarterly communications report? Do we, any questions or comments about that? Okay. Terry, do you have a additional update for us legal wise? No, she's shaking her head no. I love this. Okay, any individual director want to thrill us with the report? Okay. I think board compliance real quick. I think we have some compliance things coming up for individual board members. Nick, do you want to say anything real quick?
There's not a whole lot going on with that. Basically, if you have anything coming due, I'm going to reach out to you individually.
Okay, excellent. Future items, informational items, the event calendar, and then I guess we're at number 10. Do I hear a motion?
So
I
moved.
move adjourned. I'll second.
I don't think we need a roll call vote. I would like to thank everybody for working so hard over such a long period of time, asking great questions, making Georgina work. And I know she's wiping her brow. And thank you for sticking it out. This is a tough group. We really all appreciate each other. I know I do.
Correct. You owe Kelly some cookies or something here for having.
I think we all owe her, coffee or cookies or a glass of wine when this is all over.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Be safe.
Bye
Thank
all.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care, all.